Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never expected to feel genuine fear on my own street. I've lived in this semi-rural area for years. I know the rough patches of road, the broken streetlights, and the way the night sky looks when I drive back late. But that night changed the way I see my neighborhood forever. I was coming home from a work meeting that dragged on way past schedule. My watch said it was almost midnight, and I felt drained. The roads around here can be empty at that time, so I wasn't expecting to see anyone on the shoulder. But I spotted a figure standing there facing the street, like he was waiting for a ride. It didn't feel right. Something about that guy made every hair on my body stand on end. I slowed down just enough to get a better look. My headlights lit up his jeans and what looked like a jacket. He had short hair, maybe dark. I remember focusing on his face. Actually, I tried to focus on his face, but I couldn't see his eyes. There was a shadow or something over them, and it made no sense because the headlights should have revealed them. Usually, eyes reflect light a bit, or you can see some detail, but there was nothing. It was like two dark patches where his eyes should be. I felt this surge of panic in my gut. My throat tightened, and my foot started to tremble on the gas pedal. I thought maybe I was just exhausted, or maybe the angle of the light was strange, but he lifted his hand in a small motion, like he was signaling me to pull over. It wasn't frantic or desperate. It was more like a polite gesture, but it felt unnatural. My heart pounded. My palms felt damp against the steering wheel. I tried to rationalize it, thinking he was just a hitchhiker, but the feeling in my chest told me otherwise. I didn't want to stop. Something about him made me feel sick to my stomach. I pressed the accelerator and passed him without slowing any further. As I drove by, I glanced at him through the passenger window. He stayed perfectly still. He didn't jump or wave more aggressively. He just kept that arm raised. My headlights swept over him, but I still couldn't see his eyes. It was like my brain refused to process that part of his face. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, but it made me deeply uncomfortable. Once I was about 10 yards ahead of him, I looked in my rearview mirror. He was still there, standing like a statue on the side of the road. The only light behind me was the dim orange glow of a distant street lamp. Yet he remained visible. He didn't move. He didn't turn around or lower his arm. I felt my chest tighten even more. My breathing got shallow, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I was too spooked to do anything but drive faster. I kept going until I reached my driveway. I parked in my usual spot under the single floodlight mounted on the side of my house. My hands were shaking so hard that I had trouble putting the car in park. I took a few deep breaths, then leaned back against the driver's seat trying to calm myself. I turned off the engine and listened to the ticking sound of the car cooling down. My home was completely dark except for that floodlight, which cast a yellow beam across the gravel. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance. Usually I find that sound peaceful. That night, it felt unnerving. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend, but it was too late. Plus, I didn't know what I would say. Hey, I saw a guy on the side of the road with shadows for eyes. That sounded ridiculous. I shook my head and opened the car door. The night air was cool against my face. A slight breeze rustled the nearby bushes. I looked around. Everything seemed normal. No sign of the strange figure. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and headed straight for the bathroom. I splashed water on my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and tried to shake off the lingering fear. My reflection looked tired. My shirt collar was wrinkled from wearing it all day. My eyes had dark circles. I dried my face and decided to make a quick check outside through the window in my living room. The window overlooks my small front yard and the street beyond. I turned off the lights inside so I could see better out there. All I saw was my driveway, the same gravel and the silhouette of a few trees near the road. No one was standing there. I waited for a solid minute, eyes peeled, before I finally relaxed my shoulders. I mumbled to myself that I was just being paranoid. People out here hitchhike sometimes, and the darkness plays tricks on your eyes. That explanation didn't feel satisfying, but I wanted to sleep without worrying about it. I turned in for the night, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I started to drift off, I pictured his face without eyes, and my heart would jolt me awake. I tried listening to the hum of my bedroom fan, but every small noise outside felt magnified. A twig snapping or a sudden gust of wind against the window made my heart jump. Eventually, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, sunlight filled my bedroom. I got up, showered, and tried to focus on my work routine. My body felt a bit sore. My shoulders and neck were tense from the stress. I got dressed and made a cup of coffee in my kitchen. I checked my phone. No messages from work, so I had time to head out a bit later. I couldn't shake the feeling from last night, so I decided I'd drive by the same spot in the daylight just to see what was there. The road leading to my place is narrow and has patches of old asphalt. On one side, there's a ditch filled with tall grass. On the other side, a few large trees. I remembered the exact spot where I saw that man. There's a bent guardrail and a broken streetlight. The morning was bright and calm. A slight breeze made the grass sway. I slowed down at the guardrail. Nothing was there. The ground looked undisturbed. No footprints that I could see. Just dirt and some scattered trash, maybe plastic bottles or wrappers. I pulled over and got out of my car, which I don't normally do in this area. There aren't many cars passing by, so it felt safe enough during the day. I examined the ground. The only thing I noticed were tire marks from what could have been a passing tractor, or maybe from my own car. Nothing else indicated that someone had stood there for a while. I walked a short distance, checking for any sign of footprints or cigarette butts. Sometimes, if a person waits for a while, they leave something behind. There was nothing obvious. The ditch was full of weeds and small rocks. No footprints, no broken branches. A mild breeze carried the scent of damp earth. I stood there, feeling uneasy. I glanced toward the broken streetlight. I tried to gauge where my headlights would have hit him last night. Despite the bright daylight, I felt a hint of that previous dread creeping up my spine. I reminded myself that there was no one here now, and that gave me some relief. Still, I couldn't forget his face. I got back in my car, headed to the office, and pushed the thought aside as best I could. Work was normal. I had some emails to catch up on, meetings to schedule, and a few phone calls to make. Eventually, though, I realized I was just going through the motions. My mind kept drifting back to the road, to his raised hand, to that darkness where his eyes should have been. Around lunchtime, a coworker asked if I was feeling sick. I guess I looked pretty pale. I said I was fine, just tired. That evening, I left work earlier than usual. I didn't want to be on that road too late, especially not close to midnight again. I followed the same route home, my eyes peeled for anything unusual. I drove past the same guardrail and streetlight. Nothing. Nobody. The rest of the drive was uneventful. Still, my chest felt tight until I pulled into my driveway. Once inside, I turned on every light in the living room and kitchen. Usually, I keep them off to save energy, but I needed the brightness. I dropped my bag and rubbed the tension out of my neck. I thought about telling someone else in the neighborhood about what happened. Maybe a neighbor or the local convenience store clerk. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't have a solid explanation, and I was still unsure if I'd really seen what I thought I saw. People around here have their own stories, but I've never heard anything like a man with hidden eyes. I didn't want to stir up rumors or make people think I was losing it. So I kept my mouth shut and tried to forget. That night I had trouble sleeping again. The memory of him standing there kept flickering in my mind. I replayed it over and over, trying to figure out if there was a logical explanation. Maybe the shadow was from his hat or his hair or something else. But in my recollection, I hadn't seen a hat, and the shape of that darkness didn't look like normal shading. It was as if his eyes were erased. Thinking about it made my heart race, so I got up, walked to the kitchen, and got a glass of water. The cold water helped a bit. A few nights later, I had to stay late at work again. I told myself it was no big deal, that I was overreacting about one strange incident. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach when I realized I'd be passing that same spot around the same time as before. Still, I had no choice. I finished up my tasks and started the drive home. The roads were quiet. My headlights illuminated the familiar route. The night sky was clear, and I saw stars above the silhouettes of the trees. When I approached the broken streetlight and the guardrail, I slowed down just a touch. My eyes scanned the shoulder, but I didn't see anyone standing there. I felt both relieved and unsettled. I kept my speed steady and tried not to stare too long at the exact spot where I'd seen him. It occurred to me that maybe I should keep going without lingering. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to maintain control. As soon as I passed that area, I exhaled a long breath. I felt a rush of adrenaline subside, leaving me slightly shaky. I turned on the radio, hoping some music would distract me. It helped a little, but my stomach remained knotted. I couldn't believe how much one short encounter was affecting me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt physically and mentally drained. My hands trembled just like they had that first night. I went through my usual routine, locked the door, flipped on the lights, took off my shoes. Then I sat on my couch, staring at the dark TV screen. The house was silent except for the humming of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Part of me wanted to drive back out there with a camera or at least my phone recording to see if I could capture anything. But the larger part of me wanted to leave it alone and never think about it again. The next day I tried to bring it up casually with a coworker, not describing all the details, just mentioning that I saw a strange hitchhiker. My coworker shrugged. He said he sometimes sees people wandering around at night. He figured they might be drifters or locals who don't own cars. That didn't help me. The specific detail about the missing eyes was what had me on edge. I stayed silent about that part. Over the following weeks, I never saw him again, but I couldn't forget that image. On late drives, I would tense up whenever I passed the guardrail. Sometimes I'd speed up just to get it over with. Other times I'd drive slowly, scanning the area. Each time there was nothing out of the ordinary. The broken streetlight eventually got replaced, which should have made that stretch of road less creepy at night. Yet every time I approached, I felt a chill spreading up my arms. Now, whenever I remember that night, I still get a knot in my gut. I can recall the exact shape of his face, the way his hand moved slightly, the motionless way he stood when I looked back in my mirror. I can even recall the tightness in my chest and the sweat on my palms. Every detail remains clear in my mind. It's been months since that encounter, and I haven't told many people about it. I still don't know who or what he was. I don't have an explanation for those dark patches in place of his eyes. Some nights I even wonder if I hallucinated out of exhaustion. But I know what I felt was real. That fear was real. I keep asking myself, why didn't I see his eyes? There was nothing covering them from what I could tell. My headlights should have illuminated his face. And yet, I remember total darkness in that specific area. Not just shadows, but a complete void. It's the one thing I can't shake. I'm a logical guy, usually. I don't believe in bizarre stories without proof. But I saw something that night, and it scared me more than anything I've experienced in this quiet place. Even now, I can't drive past that guardrail at night without my body tensing. I still look at the spot for a second, half expecting to see him again. He's never there. There's no trace of him. But that memory is burned into my mind. I've tried to push it away, but I can't forget. It's changed how I feel about my own neighborhood. I used to feel safe here, even on dark roads. Now I lock my doors more carefully. I keep my eyes on the shoulders of the street, and I make sure to come home earlier whenever possible. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Sometimes I think maybe he was just passing through, or maybe I caught him at some weird moment. But the more I replay that night, the more unsettled I become. I wish I had a clear explanation. All I have is that vivid memory of a man without visible eyes standing under a broken streetlight, gesturing for me to stop. I'm still relieved I didn't. And every time I pass that spot, I feel that same rush of cold dread. reminding me of what I saw and how it's never quite left me. I never thought a simple run could shake me up so much. I started running at night a few months ago to clear my head after long days at the office. I usually zone out with my earbuds in and let the music drown out everything else. The streets stay quiet, and I like having that space to breathe. But one night changed how I see those runs forever. I got off work later than usual that evening. The office lights had started to turn off one by one, and I hurried out before the cleaning crew showed up. My legs felt stiff, and my shoulders were tense. I remember stepping outside into the cool air. It felt refreshing on my face, and it made me want to stretch my arms over my head. I thought I would unwind with a steady jog around my usual route. It's about a 5-mile loop through my neighborhood and a couple of side streets. Most of the roads are quiet after 8 o'clock. Some houses have lights on inside, but nobody's really out walking. I like that sense of isolation when I run. It usually helps me decompress. I locked my apartment door, scrolled through my phone to pick a playlist, and made sure my earbuds were fully charged. I set out at an easy pace. My shoes slapped against the sidewalk. The first mile went smoothly, and I felt my breath sink with the music. The night air was a bit humid, but there was a gentle breeze. I passed by a few parked cars and a closed convenience store. The neon sign in the window glowed red, but the door was locked. I looked around just to make sure I wasn't missing any other night owls. I saw nobody. Around the second mile, my legs started to loosen up. My tension from work slowly melted away. I remember hearing a dog bark in the distance, but I couldn't see it. Most houses kept their lights dim, except for the occasional window with a flickering television glow. I tried to focus on my pace and keep my breathing steady. The music in my earbuds was loud enough to drown out the quiet around me. I reached the halfway point near a small local park. There's a path that circles around a duck pond, but at night it's empty, and the streetlights there flicker on and off. I usually pass through without stopping because it can feel a bit eerie. That night I felt a slight chill in the air, and I noticed how silent it was when I paused my music for a second to catch my breath. Then I turned the playlist back on, let the beat fill my ears, and pressed forward. Somewhere around the next bend, my music started to crackle. I thought it might be Bluetooth interference, so I tapped my phone to see if I had an incoming call or a notification. Nothing showed up. The static got louder, and then it stopped. I waited for the next song to kick in, but instead of the next track, I heard a weak, shaky whisper. It sounded like it was right next to me. It was someone saying my name over and over again, very slowly. I froze in my tracks because it felt too real. My first thought was that maybe I had accidentally switched to the wrong station, or maybe I got some weird radio overlap. I checked my phone screen. It showed the music app still running, but I couldn't hear the music at all. All I heard was that whisper. It kept repeating my name in the same tone like it was on a loop. My stomach tightened, and I felt sweat gather on the back of my neck. I tried to turn the volume down. The whisper didn't get lower. It stayed at the same level. It felt close, like someone standing next to me. I could practically feel breath on my ear. I pulled out my earbuds, but that sound continued, muffled, yet still there. It didn't cut off. It got a little quieter, but I could swear it still said my name. My head started to pound. I looked around, hoping to see if anyone was messing with me or if there was some device hidden nearby. The street was empty. The houses on that block were dark, no lights in the windows. I saw a flicker of movement behind one curtain, but it was probably just a shadow from a passing car. No one was outside, and there were no passing cars at that moment. I tried to shake off the feeling of panic. I shoved the earbuds back in, hoping the music would pop back on. Instead, the whisper came through clearer. My name repeated again. I felt my chest tighten, and my breath started coming in short bursts. I forced myself to start jogging. I told myself it was just some glitch. Maybe some weird signal hijacked my earbuds. That can happen, right? Interference or some test channel picking up my phone's frequency. I tried to think of a logical explanation. I told myself it would stop if I just kept running, but it didn't stop. For at least a few more blocks, that voice kept whispering my name. My pace got faster because I wanted to get away from that sound. My heart pounded against my ribs and my throat felt dry. At one point, I turned off the music app entirely and even hit pause a few times. The whisper kept going. It had this crackling quality, like a faint radio signal. It was the same volume no matter how far I ran. I started to sweat more than usual. My shirt stuck to my back and my arms felt clammy. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw nothing but dim sidewalks and parked cars. A few porch lights were on, but not many. The only motion I saw was a neighbor's flag flapping in a gentle breeze. Yet I felt this strong urge to run faster. I felt I was being followed, but I never saw anything actually following me. My mind raced with possible reasons. Could it be a prank from someone who got hold of my phone? Could it be a technical glitch that looped my own name back at me? None of it made sense. I hit the next street corner and skidded to a stop. My hand trembled as I held my phone. I shut down the music app completely. I dragged down the notifications and force-closed every open application. I considered turning the phone off right then, but I worried about losing my light source. I need my phone flashlight sometimes because some stretches of sidewalk have broken lamps. My head felt dizzy, and I had a slight tremor in my hands. I pressed play on my music again, hoping it would drown out everything. For a second, I heard the faint start of a song. Then it vanished into the same static. That whisper returned, quieter, but still there. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I bent over and rested my hands on my knees, trying not to panic. The whisper got louder again, as though it sensed my fear. I spun around to scan the street. A breeze rustled some leaves by the curb, and I heard them scrape across the pavement. I listened for footsteps or any other noise, but all I picked up was that voice in my earbuds and the rustling leaves. My name repeated, each syllable drawn out. I could feel goosebumps on my arms, and I couldn't control the slight shakiness in my legs. I muttered to myself, "Stop. This is just in my head." It's a glitch. But it didn't feel like a glitch. The voice sounded too organic, too directed at me. I pushed forward again, breaking into a quick run. My lungs burned, and I could hear my own breathing over the whisper now. My head pounded. My eyes darted left and right, scanning every driveway, every porch, every window. Nothing moved. I felt alone in the street, but that voice wouldn't let up. After what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, the whisper cut off. 1 second it was there, the next second everything went silent. No static, no voice, no music, just my own footsteps and heartbeat. I slowed to a jog, then to a walk. My breath was ragged, and I felt the muscles in my legs trembling. I tried to steady myself against a nearby fence. I slipped one earbud out, then the other. Silence. I tapped my phone, and the music app was still paused. It didn't show any error or glitch. My battery level looked normal, and there were no notifications. I stood there, letting the cool air calm my skin. My shirt clung to me, and my chest rose and fell in fast gulps of air. I remember the faint hum of a distant air conditioner and the hum of nearby streetlights. There was no sign of the whisper. I exhaled in relief, but I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I turned in a slow circle, expecting someone to jump out, but nobody did. I decided to head straight home. I usually finish the 5 miles, but I wasn't in the mood to keep going. My mind was racing, and I wanted to get inside, lock my door, and check every device I own. I kept the earbuds around my neck, not wanting to risk hearing that voice again. With every step, I felt my heart thud, and I had this nervous energy that made me want to sprint. I forced myself to keep a brisk walk so I wouldn't arrive home completely out of breath. When I finally got to my apartment, I slammed the door shut and double-locked it. I took off my sneakers and just stood there in the entryway. My clothes were soaked with sweat. I felt a bit nauseous. I towed my phone out of my pocket and hit the power button, turning it off entirely. I placed my earbuds on the kitchen counter. They looked harmless. Tiny pieces of plastic and silicone. I stared at them, half expecting them to start hissing or whispering. They stayed silent. I made a beeline for the bathroom, splashed some cold water on my face, and tried to breathe slowly. My reflection showed wide eyes and a tense jaw. My hair was damp and stuck to my forehead. I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I dried my face and walked back to the kitchen. I turned my phone back on and waited. It lit up normally, with no strange messages or errors. I scrolled through my notifications. Nothing unusual. The music app showed the track I'd paused. I tapped it and the song played right away, no static. I tested the earbuds and they sounded normal. It was like nothing had happened. I checked for updates or viruses. Nothing. I even uninstalled the music app and reinstalled it to see if it was corrupted. Everything checked out. I sank into a chair and tried to piece it all together. My body felt exhausted, and my pulse was still racing. It was like my adrenaline had nowhere to go. I sat there, replaying every moment in my head. The sudden shift from music to static, the whisper, my name repeated again and again, the way it followed me. It didn't make any logical sense. I tried to calm myself by thinking it was some random radio interference, but the sheer clarity of that voice made my skin crawl. It didn't sound like random chatter or bits of someone else's broadcast. It was my name, over and over. Exactly the same tone each time, as if it knew me. The fact that it persisted after I turned the music off only made it worse. I shut my eyes and breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. My apartment was quiet, except for the hum of my fridge and a drip from the kitchen faucet. Everything seemed normal again, yet my mind wouldn't let me relax. I felt a chill run down my back whenever I remembered that voice. The whisper was so distinct. I never heard anything like that before. I started to wonder if I was just too tired. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. Stress can do strange things. Work had been tough that week and I hadn't been sleeping well, but it felt too real. I remember the tightness in my chest and the way my ears actually registered sound. I remember hearing it so clearly. If it had been a hallucination, I would expect some confusion or uncertainty about what I heard, but I was certain it said my name. Eventually, I got up and took a long shower. The hot water eased some tension in my shoulders, but I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. I kept thinking about how it stopped so suddenly, like it vanished on command. After the shower, I checked my phone one more time. Everything worked fine. I decided to go to bed and see if I felt any differently in the morning. I didn't sleep well that night. I tossed and turned, worried that I might wake up to that sound again. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured myself back on that dark street, hearing my name whispered through static. I woke up with the sheets damp from sweat and my alarm blaring. My heart was racing before I even got out of bed. Over the next few days, I tried to run again, but I couldn't forget that incident. I lowered the volume on my earbuds and I started picking routes that had better lighting. The voice never returned. The music played normally and I stayed aware of my surroundings. I kept glancing over my shoulder whenever I heard any slight noise or crackle. Nothing strange happened during those runs. Still, I found myself jumpy whenever I thought I heard a faint buzz from my phone. To this day, I have no explanation for that night. I checked my devices, updated everything, and even replaced my earbuds with a different brand. I haven't heard that whisper since, but the memory stays with me. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how real it felt. I can still feel my heart pounding when I remember that static and the way my name echoed in my ears. I don't have a satisfying conclusion or a neat explanation. All I know is that I heard something that scared the hell out of me, and I don't know if it was some weird technical glitch or something else. I've told a few friends, and most of them shrug it off or tell me it must have been interference. I'd like to believe that. But I can't ignore how it followed me and how it said my name so precisely. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was everything. I keep running at night because I don't want fear to keep me stuck indoors. But I stay alert now. I watch the streets, and I check my phone if the music so much as skips. Nothing has happened again, but I still get that chill when I remember how I froze in the middle of the street, hearing that faint voice whispering my name in the darkness. I stepped into that house with my suitcase in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. I was tired from a long day at work, but I felt something odd as soon as I crossed the doorway. The hallway walls looked normal, the floor had no cracks, and the paint still had a decent sheen, but I sensed a kind of pressure around me that made me want to keep glancing over my shoulder. It wasn't a dramatic feeling, more like a prickling at the back of my neck that made the hair stand up. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just worn out. I needed a place close to my new job, and this house checked the right boxes. It was small, affordable, and near the office. That first night, I told myself to ignore any weird vibes. I unpacked my things and tried to settle in. I'm a straightforward guy. I'm not superstitious, and I don't like to blow things out of proportion. But a few days after I moved in, I noticed small changes around the place. At first, I thought I was just forgetful. I'd leave a book on the desk in the guest room. The next morning, I'd find it on the floor or on a different shelf. There were also times when I was sure I left the guest room window open to get some fresh air, but I would come back from work to find it shut tight. I kept thinking, did I close it without remembering? I've had long days at the office, so maybe I was spacing out. Then one night, about 2 weeks after I moved in, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. I heard a small click from the hallway light switch. I got up, walked over to the bedroom door, and noticed the glow under the door frame. Sure enough, the hallway light was on. I clearly remembered flipping it off before I went to bed. I always do that. I stepped into the hallway and found nothing out of the ordinary, except that the light was burning brightly. I turned it off again, went back to bed, and stayed awake another hour, feeling uneasy. My heart beat a little faster than usual, and I kept looking at the slice of darkness beneath the door, waiting for it to light up again, but it stayed dark that night. A few days after that, I got to work late because I overslept. I was up half the night, convinced I heard someone moving around in the guest bedroom. The floorboards squeaked every so often, like soft footsteps. I told myself it was just the old heating system or random creaks that houses make. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside that room, shifting weight from one foot to another. In the morning, I went in there to check. Nothing was out of place at first glance, but then I noticed a small box of papers I keep in the corner was lying on its side. The papers were scattered around. It could have been me rummaging for something and forgetting to straighten it up, but I hadn't touched that box in a week. I picked everything up, tidied it, and went on with my day, still feeling tense. I decided to ask the property owner if there was any history, or if other tenants reported anything unusual. When I called him, he paused for a moment before giving a nervous laugh. He said some of the previous renters had mentioned lights turning on, items moving, and weird noises at night. He told me not to worry and joked that the house was just settling. But he didn't sound confident. I hung up feeling more uneasy. The fact that other people complained about the same issues made my situation feel more real. I had this knot in my stomach that day. For the rest of that week, I tried to ignore the strange sensations and minor incidents. I buried myself in work, came home late, ate dinner, and went straight to bed. But around Thursday, I had another unsettling experience. I was drifting off to sleep lying on my side when I felt a presence on the other side of the bedroom door. It wasn't a normal feeling. It was like I could hear soft breathing, or maybe a light rustling, as if someone was leaning against the door. My mouth went dry and my pulse pounded in my ears. I lay there for a few minutes, just staring at the door. I didn't want to move. I debated with myself if I should speak up. Maybe I should say, "Who's there?" But I didn't. I stayed silent. Eventually, I made myself get out of bed. I walked to the door and grabbed the handle. My hand felt clammy. I turned the lock and swung the door open in one quick motion. The hallway light was off, but some street light came through the small window. I could see the corridor was empty. There was no one there. My chest was tight, and my heartbeat thudded in my throat. I checked every room, but everything looked normal. I went back to bed and forced myself to sleep. I couldn't relax until maybe 2 in the morning. That weekend, I spent more time in the house during the day. I moved some furniture around, organized the guest room, and tried to make the place feel more like mine. I thought maybe if I put my own mark on it, I'd feel more comfortable. I put up shelves, arranged my books, and stored some important files in the closet. The guest room had a small desk where I could do some paperwork. I figured I'd start using that space instead of avoiding it. Maybe that would break the tension. Over the next few days, I caught myself constantly checking on the guest room. I'd go in there, look around, check the window, and look at the floor. Each time it felt colder in there than in the rest of the house. I didn't have a thermometer, but it was noticeable. My arms would get goosebumps when I stepped through the door. I tried adjusting the vents and looking for drafts, but I never found a clear explanation. At night, I made sure the window was locked and the light was off. Sometimes I'd wake up in the morning to find the window unlatched or the ceiling light on. It was like someone was messing with me. I called the property owner again. I wanted to know if he'd had the electrical wiring checked or if there was some problem with the heating ducts. He stammered a bit and said everything was fine. I asked him for details about the previous tenants. He avoided specifics. He said they just moved out because they found a better opportunity. I pressed him a bit, telling him I was dealing with bizarre occurrences. He got defensive and said I was free to move out if I didn't feel comfortable. But breaking my lease wouldn't be simple, and I didn't have the energy to look for a new place and move all over again. I decided to stick it out for a while, hoping I'd adjust. I started a routine of checking every room in the house before going to bed. I'd walk through the living room, the small kitchen, the guest room, and then the hallway. I'd flip off every light, make sure every door and window was locked, and then head to my bedroom. Even so, I kept waking up at random hours, hearing the sound of footsteps in the hall or soft clicks from the guest room door. Sometimes I thought I heard the desk chair scraping against the floor like someone was sliding it back. Once, around 3 in the morning, I heard what sounded like the pages of a book being turned. That sound is pretty distinct, that light flutter as someone flips through paper. I sat up in bed, my heart thudding, and strained to listen. The noise stopped, and I was left sitting in silence. One morning, I decided to set up a small camera in the guest room. It was just a simple webcam connected to my old laptop. I wanted to see if anything would happen while I was asleep or out at work. I tucked it on a shelf, aimed at the desk and the window. The first night, I recorded about 8 hours of footage. When I played it back the next day, I saw nothing unusual except a bit of glare when headlights passed by outside. A couple of nights later, I tried again. This time, I made sure to position the camera toward the door as well. I watched the footage and fast forward. Around 2:14 a.m., I noticed the camera view shifted slightly as if someone bumped into the shelf. It was a small jerk, but enough for me to see the angle was different after that point. I didn't see any figure, though. No visible person. Just that sudden shift in the camera's position, and then it stayed that way for the rest of the recording. That freaked me out. I had locked the guest room door before going to bed that night. When I found the door in the morning, it was still locked. I used the same key I always use, and the knob turned normally. There was no sign of forced entry or tampering. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the shelf was unstable. Maybe the camera just slipped. But I couldn't forget the other events. The lights, the window, the feeling of being watched. My stress level soared. I noticed my hands shook sometimes, especially at night when I did my routine checks. I started clenching my jaw in my sleep. I would wake up with a dull ache in my cheeks and temples. A couple of nights later, I woke up again around 2 in the morning. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling. My ears were tuned to every little sound. Eventually, I heard quiet breathing coming from just outside my bedroom door. I waited, hoping it would go away. My chest felt tight, and my skin prickled. The breathing went on, steady and soft. I couldn't ignore it. I forced myself to get out of bed and walk toward the door. My hand was trembling as I reached for the lock. I turned it quickly and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty. There was no sound, no movement. The air felt still and my mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. I walked down the hall, passing by the closed door of the guest room. I touched the doorknob. It felt cold, but I turned it anyway. The door opened with a slight squeak. The room looked normal, but I sensed that same cold spot. The curtains were drawn, the light was off, and everything was still. I flipped the switch and checked the desk. Nothing out of order. I glanced at the webcam. It was in place, angled properly. I felt foolish standing there, shirtless, heart pounding, afraid of an empty room. But I couldn't deny the heavy feeling in my chest. After that night, the tension escalated. I had trouble focusing at work. My boss asked if everything was okay. I said I was just tired. Back at the house, I'd find more evidence that something was interfering with my routine. One evening, I noticed the corridor light was on again, even though I was sure I left it off. Another time, I discovered my closet door in the guest room was open wide, and a few of my boxes were halfway out. It looked like someone had been going through them. No valuables were missing, but the papers inside were rearranged. Finally, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I invited a coworker over for dinner, explaining I wanted a second set of eyes on the house. We sat in the living room and talked for a while. I didn't go into all the strange details, just said I felt weird in the place. My coworker walked around, commented that the layout was a bit cramped but otherwise fine. Nothing jumped out as odd during the visit. We watched a movie and I felt more relaxed with someone else there. After my coworker left, though, I felt the tension again almost immediately. It was like the air got heavier as soon as I was alone. That night, I stayed up until almost midnight. The house was quiet. I listened for footsteps, breathing, or movement, but heard nothing. Eventually, I crawled into bed. I drifted off, thinking maybe the place was giving me a night off. Then, at around 3 a.m, I startled awake. My bedroom was dark, and I could barely see. But I heard a faint thump from the hallway. I tensed up and rolled onto my back, staring at the door. Another thump, closer this time. My stomach clenched. I considered calling the police, but I had no real evidence of an intruder. It was just an odd noise. I got up, opened the door slowly, and peered into the hallway. The corridor light was off, so I flipped it on. The hallway looked empty. Nothing on the floor, no signs of anything disturbed. I walked to the guest room door. It was slightly ajar, which was unusual because I always close it fully. I pushed it open. That cold air hit me again, making me shiver. The lamp on the desk was on, shining a dull glow across the small room. I had turned that lamp off earlier, right before going to bed. My breathing got shallow. I walked over and pulled the chain on the lamp, turning it off. I wanted to shout, to demand that whoever was doing this show themselves, but I knew that was pointless. There was nobody there. I stood in the dark for a few seconds, my eyes adjusting. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. The place smelled stale, like dust and old paper. I turned around and walked out of the guest room, leaving the door open. I hurried back to my bedroom and locked the door. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. After that, I knew I couldn't keep living this way for long. The house was wearing me down. The incidents didn't stop. There was no big dramatic event, but the little things added up. Lights flicked on in empty rooms. Windows opened or closed on their own. Papers shifted. Drawers were found half open. Some nights, I heard that soft breathing outside my door. Other times, I heard muffled movement in the guest room. I started sleeping with a small bat by my bed, but I never found anyone to use it on. I haven't moved out yet, but I've decided to keep looking for a new place. I'm going to break my lease no matter the cost. I can't stand the constant edge of anxiety. I feel drained all the time. The landlord keeps dodging my questions about the house's past, and I don't feel safe here. It's not that I think something's going to hurt me, but I can't handle the idea that I'm not alone, even though no one shows up when I look. Living with that kind of uncertainty tears you up inside. Every night I brace myself for some new sign that I'm being watched or followed. Every day I see little hints that something is off. Tomorrow I'm going to pack some bags and stay at a coworker's place for a while. I don't care if it's inconvenient. I need sleep. I need to stop feeling like my heart's about to jump out of my chest every time the floor creaks. I plan to talk to the landlord face to face in the morning, get him to release me from this lease, and then I'll move out as soon as possible. I can't prove what's happening here. I don't have any clear footage of a person or any real evidence that can explain these events, but I know it's real because I've experienced it. That's the entire story. I wish I had some neat ending or a rational explanation. I don't. This house just isn't right for me, and I'm done trying to make it work. I'm out of options. I'm leaving. And if someone else wants to take my place here, I'll warn them. This house doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied. And whatever is inside these walls doesn't seem interested in sharing. I felt my handlebars jerk to the side and my rear tires skidded on loose gravel. My stomach jumped, and I squeezed the brakes. Nothing stopped the slide. My right knee hit the curb, and everything else blurred. When I came to a halt, my bike lay on its side, and I was on my back in the dirt. My helmet visor was smeared with dust. My ears buzzed with the leftover noise of the impact. My chest felt tight. I checked my arms and legs. My knee pulsed with hot pain. I could move my toes, so I knew I wasn't paralyzed, but that didn't comfort me much. I propped myself on my elbows to see what happened. My motorcycle was about 10 feet away, half on the road and half in the dirt near a vacant lot. I saw my jacket was ripped at the shoulder. My palms were scraped. There was a sharp, throbbing ache in my knee. I tried to bend my leg. It bent, but it hurt so bad that I hissed through my teeth. My mouth was so dry I could hardly swallow. I forced myself to stand leaning on my left leg. My right leg felt shaky and weak. I let out a small groan when I put a bit of weight on that side. My bike was still running, though the engine sputtered in a strange way. I reached for the handlebar and turned the key to kill the ignition. I heard the engine cut out, then everything went too quiet. The wind blew across that empty field next to me, carrying a musty smell. I looked around for help. Not a single car passed. It was late, but I still expected a pair of headlights somewhere. I took off my helmet to catch my breath. My face was damp with sweat. I smelled my own panic, kind of a salty odor mixed with the dust and a bit of gasoline. As I tried to collect my thoughts, I heard a crunch of footsteps behind me. A man stood there. He had an old faded cap on his head. His jacket looked worn at the elbows. His hands rested at his sides. He didn't speak. I felt a spike of surprise and tried to straighten up, but my knee almost buckled. He reached out and gripped my arm. His fingers were strong and steady. I felt a wave of relief to have help, but he never said a word. He just gestured for me to lean on him. I nodded and tried to say thanks. My voice came out a bit raspy. He started to guide me step by step toward the roadside. I limped alongside him, wincing whenever my right foot touched the ground. Once we got to the edge of the road, he turned back for my bike. He waved at me to wait. I did, leaning against a fence post that bordered the vacant lot. My mind raced with random thoughts. Did anyone else see us? Did my phone survive the crash? My pockets felt empty. I patted myself until I realized I'd left my phone in the bike's storage compartment. I tried to see if the man would look back at me for instructions, but he seemed to know what he was doing. He rolled my bike onto the shoulder and balanced it there. When he came back, I noticed his eyes. They were serious, maybe a little sad, but I couldn't tell in the dim light. He motioned for me to follow him. His arm movements were smooth and careful, like someone who knew how to handle an injured person. I asked, "Do you know if there's a gas station nearby?" The man gave a slight nod. Then he made a gesture like he wanted me to walk in a certain direction. I asked him, "Can you help me get there?" He nodded again. I wondered why he didn't speak, but I felt too worn out to press him. The pain in my knee flared up every time I took a step. My breathing got shallow. I bit down on my bottom lip to stop from cursing too loud. The man stayed right next to me. I could hear his footsteps on the gravel. I smelled a faint odor coming from him, like stale smoke or something metallic. He didn't look at me much. He just led the way. I scanned the horizon for some sign of headlights. Nothing. There was a slight glow further up the road, which I guessed might be the gas station. We walked like that for a few minutes. It felt longer. I heard my pulse thudding in my ears. At some point, I noticed I was still wearing my own cap, but the back was twisted sideways from the fall. I took it off and shook it. Dirt flew out in small clumps. The man glanced over at me but didn't react. I wondered if he was deaf or just not interested in talking. My thoughts were jumbled, so I focused on the physical task of moving one foot after the other. The air was crisp. My teeth chattered a bit, partly from pain, partly from nerves. The silence between us felt strange, but I wasn't in the mood to force a conversation. After maybe another 10 or 15 minutes, I saw the bright lights of a gas station sign. It stood on the corner where the highway curved. The man waved his hand toward it. I nodded and said, "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it." He dipped his head in a small nod. I took a few more steps forward, and I planned to turn around and ask if he could help me call someone. But when I turned, I didn't see him. I spun a bit too fast and felt my knee scream in protest. I gasped and stopped in my tracks. The man was gone. I tried to peer into the darkness behind me. There was only the vague outline of some weeds near the vacant lot. No other movement, no footsteps fading away. I listened for the sound of gravel shifting under shoes. I heard nothing but the wind. I stood there, breathing hard and shaking. My mind raced with questions. Had he moved that fast? Did he slip behind some fence? I tried to call out, but my voice didn't carry very far. I just let out a long exhale and limped the rest of the way to the station. When I got there, the bright fluorescent lights stung my eyes. The inside of the station looked empty except for a bored attendant by the counter. I pushed the door open. A bell overhead made a sharp ding. The attendant looked up. He was a skinny guy, maybe mid-30s, wearing a rumpled gray polo shirt with the station's logo. I asked if he had a first aid kit. He came around the counter and grabbed one from a small wall cabinet. He asked if I was in an accident, and I said, "Yeah, back down the road." He nodded like he was half listening. I sank into a plastic chair by the window while he handed me some antiseptic wipes and gauze. After a few minutes, I told him about the man who helped me. I asked if that guy had come through the station earlier. The attendant stared at me. He said, "I haven't seen anyone out there but you." His tone was casual, and it sent a chill across my arms. I repeated my question, describing the man's old cap, his silent gestures, and the way he guided me here. The attendant shrugged. "I've been here all night. Nobody else passed by." I felt my breathing catch in my throat. It didn't make sense. The station had a clear view of the road, and that man had walked with me almost the entire way. I felt shaky again. I tried to change the subject, asked if the attendant had a phone I could use. My phone was in the bike, and I couldn't walk back without help. He handed me a cordless phone from behind the counter. I called a friend who lived close enough to pick me up. While I waited, I kept looking out the window, expecting to see that man, or at least my bike's headlights if someone was messing with it. The road stayed empty, just the glow of the street lamp shining on the corner. My friend arrived in about 20 minutes. We drove back to my bike, loaded it onto his pickup, and I checked the area. No sign of anyone. The vacant lot looked deserted. Once I got home, my friend helped me inside, and I propped my leg up with some pillows. He left after making sure I was okay. I had the next day off work, so I figured I'd clean up my gear and see how banged up everything was. In the morning, I woke up with a stiff knee. It was swollen but not broken. I rummaged through my clothes from the crash. My jacket was still dusty, and my helmet had a few scrapes. Then I saw my cap. It was smudged with some dark stains on the rim and in a few spots on the front. At first I thought it was dried blood, but the color wasn't quite right. It wasn't the usual dark red you get with bloodstains. It had a slight shimmer like an oily residue. I sniffed it, expecting a metallic or iron smell. Instead, I got a weird earthy odor, something I couldn't place. I tried to wipe it off, but the stain had stuck to the fabric. I decided to just wash the cap in the sink. I turned on the faucet, warm water running over the cap. As I scrubbed with soap, the water turned murky. I saw bits of blackish material swirling in the sink. It almost looked like soot. I touched it and felt a gritty texture on my fingertips. It didn't feel like engine grease either. My bike's chain grease usually has a thick, slick feel. This was more powdery, crumbling when I rubbed my fingers together. I stared at it. I had no idea what caused those marks. I rinsed the cap until the water ran clear, but small traces of that grit still clung to the fabric. I dried my cap and left it on the counter. All day I kept thinking about the man with the old cap. I wondered if I had accidentally swapped caps with him, but mine looked the same as always except for those weird stains. When I had put it on the night of the crash, I remember the inside band feeling snug. That detail matched the cap in my kitchen. It had the same small tear at the back seam, so it was definitely mine. But that meant I had no explanation for the stains. I also couldn't figure out how my cap got that dirty in just that short crash. My jacket and pants had normal scuffs and a little grease from the bike, but not this odd residue. I replayed the accident in my head. I remembered the moment I flipped over the handlebars, my knee hitting the curb. The man showing up, the road so quiet. Everything played in my mind like a series of flashes. I asked myself if I had imagined him, but my bike was moved, and I couldn't have done that by myself. I could barely stand without his help. I wondered if maybe he was some local guy who didn't want to stick around or talk. But then the station attendant's reaction came back to me. He was certain nobody else passed by. I checked my knee. It was bandaged up. The bruise covered a wide area, and it hurt whenever I pressed it. That was real. The cuts on my palms felt raw too. Also real. I poured a glass of water and stared at my cap on the counter. The silence in my apartment made me feel anxious. I looked out the window. Cars passed outside. Some beeped. I turned on the TV for noise, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind drifted back to that man's face, his eyes, the old cap, and the quiet way he helped me. I kept telling myself there must be a straightforward reason for what happened. But in the end, I couldn't find one. He disappeared so fast. I didn't hear a single footstep. The attendant should have spotted him, and there was no sign of him on the road when I went back with my friend. All I had was that weird dust or whatever it was on my cap. I ended up visiting the crash site a few days later. My knee was still sore, so I wore a brace. I parked my friend's pickup on the shoulder where my bike went down. I saw the skid marks, a patch of scuffed asphalt. The curb had a fresh scrape, probably from my knee or my bike's foot peg. I checked around for footprints or a spot where someone might have stood. I saw some flattened grass. It might have been from me landing there, or maybe from the man's shoes. The vacant lot looked the same as that night. Dry weeds, patches of dirt, some broken glass. No footprints stood out to me. I didn't see anything that could explain what I remembered. I walked around a bit, though it hurt to do so. The wind blew through the grass, making a rustling sound. The noise felt oddly tense to me. I imagined that man appearing again, but he didn't. I looked up and down the road. Some cars passed on the highway now. Nobody stopped. I had enough, so I got back in the truck and headed home. Since then, I've tried to move on from that night. Sometimes I forget about it for weeks, and then I'll glance at my cap or see the faint scar on my knee, and it all rushes back. I still don't know who that man was or if I imagined him in the confusion, but I didn't imagine the bike being moved. I felt his grip on my arm. I saw him gesture for me to walk toward the gas station, and I found that strange black grit in my cap. I don't have any big lesson or deep thought about it. It happened. It freaked me out. And to this day, I can't explain it. I just know that when I needed help, someone showed up out of nowhere. He never said a word, and he vanished when I tried to thank him. The next morning, I found stains on my own cap that didn't match anything I recognized. That's it. That's all I can say. I still look at people's faces when I'm out on the road, especially if they're wearing an old cap. Part of me expects to see him again. Part of me hopes I never do. never thought I would lose my composure on a simple nighttime walk. I've been circling that lake for months without any trouble. I enjoy going after 10 at night because the place is usually empty. I like the quiet air and the reflection of the moon on the water. I used to feel calm from the moment I started until I finished. Now I feel on edge the entire time, always looking over my shoulder. It all began when I saw that dark furred dog. I noticed it on a random Tuesday. I parked my car in the small lot next to the lake. The lampposts around the path cast enough light for me to see about 10 or 15 feet in front of me, but not much more. The moonlight helped, though it wasn't full or especially bright. The night air felt cool, and I remember adjusting my windbreaker before starting to walk. The first lap was calm. I passed one elderly man who seemed lost in thought. I waved at him, and he nodded once without speaking. A couple sat on a bench near the entrance, chatting. I recall hearing a soft murmur of their conversation and the scraping sound of their shoes against the gravel. Then I noticed the dog. It stood near the edge of the path, not too far from some bushes. The creature looked still, like it was watching something. At first, I didn't realize it was watching me. Its eyes had this yellow sheen under the lamppost. I glanced over, but it didn't move. I kept walking. It's not unusual to see stray dogs around. There are a few in the neighborhood, though most have collars. Sometimes they roam around hoping to find scraps. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But when I took another look over my shoulder, the dog was on the path behind me a few yards away. I slowed down for a second. It slowed down too. I sped up. It kept pace. It didn't charge or growl. It just stayed behind me at the same distance. I couldn't hear any distinct breathing or panting. In fact, the dog was impressively quiet. The only clue was its silhouette moving in the corner of my vision whenever I glanced back. When I stopped to stretch near a bench, the dog stopped as well. I turned around and faced it. The lamppost light hit its eyes again. They looked bright, but not in a normal reflection kind of way. They seemed more intense, but I tried not to dwell on that. I spoke in a calm voice. "Hey, buddy. You lost or something?" The dog didn't react. No bark, no wag, no tilt of the head. It just stood there. I tried approaching it carefully. I took 2 steps forward, holding out my hand, and it stepped back, lowering its head but not looking away. That gave me a little chill because I realized it was fixating on me, but not in the usual timid way dogs do. It felt more like it was studying me. I decided to ignore it for the time being and continued walking. It followed. I tried to stay calm. I thought maybe it was hungry or curious. Halfway around the loop, I encountered a maintenance worker. He was pushing a small cart with cleaning supplies, probably checking trash cans. I pointed toward the dog. "Hey, do you know if that dog belongs to anyone around here?" The maintenance guy looked over my shoulder, squinted, and shook his head. "Haven't seen it before," he said, then returned to his duties. The dog stayed behind me for the rest of my second lap. After a while, I got a bit nervous. Something about those eyes bothered me, and I didn't like the way it matched my pace. It never once tried to come closer. It also never turned away. I heard crickets, faint traffic noise from the nearby street, and my own footsteps on the gravel. The dog's footsteps were barely audible, like it was treading lightly. When I finished the second lap, I thought about checking if it had a collar. I slowed down until I almost stopped. It stopped too, still maintaining that distance. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady my nerves. My heart was beating faster than normal, and I could feel the blood pulsing in my neck. I spoke louder this time. "Come here, buddy. I won't hurt you. Come on." I crouched down and patted my leg, like people do when calling a dog. It inched back a bit. I took 1 step forward, and it bolted off the path and into the darker area near a patch of trees. I lost sight of it for a moment. I scanned the area, squinting. The bushes near the water shook slightly, but I couldn't see any movement beyond that. The dog seemed to vanish. I walked toward the bushes, calling out, "Hey, come on. I just want to check if you're all right." No sound came back. I walked around the nearest trees, not straying too far from the path because it was easy to lose footing in the shadows. I expected to see it lurking or running away, but there was nothing. No rustling, no sign of paw prints, nothing at all. I felt a wave of unease tighten my stomach. My hands felt clammy, and the hairs on my arms stood up. I told myself the dog must have slipped through a gap in the fence or found some hiding spot. I tried not to let my imagination run wild. It was just a stray dog, after all. But the sudden disappearance unnerved me. I continued my walk for a third lap, mostly to convince myself I wasn't spooked. Each step felt heavier than usual. I kept glancing around, searching for movement. A small breeze rustled the leaves, and once in a while, a passing car's headlights sliced across the water. Every time I passed under a lamppost, I caught a glimpse of my own shadow stretching ahead of me. I felt the strong urge to check behind me. Sometimes I gave in and looked. Nothing. My chest felt tight every time I turned around. That night I went home earlier than usual. In my apartment, I turned on more lights than normal. I noticed my heart was still beating fast and my breathing was shallow. I tried to watch some late-night TV, hoping to distract myself, but every few minutes, my mind drifted back to that moment when the dog locked eyes with me. I told myself it was silly. I had to let it go. Eventually, I went to bed, but I slept poorly. I dreamed about walking around that lake, hearing footsteps behind me, and never being able to catch the source. The next evening, I almost skipped my walk. My stomach felt tense at the idea of going back there, but I forced myself. My routine matters to me, and I hate letting fear dictate my actions. I arrived around the same time, parked in my usual spot, and set off along the path. At first I felt uneasy, scanning the area more than usual. I noticed every small detail: the dim light from each lamppost, the rust on the metal benches, the scattered pebbles on the ground. For the first half of my walk, I didn't see any sign of that dog. I started to relax a bit. Then, near the lake's far side, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing on the path behind me. I exhaled, feeling a bit foolish. I chalked it up to my imagination, but as I continued, I caught a glimpse of a dark shape near the edge of the lake. It looked like the silhouette of a dog, watching from a distance. I froze mid-step. My breath caught in my throat. The shape vanished behind some tall reeds. I hurried over, shining my phone's flashlight. The area was empty. The water lapped gently against the shore, and the breeze made the reeds sway. But there was no sign of the dog. My heart was thudding in my chest again. My palms got sweaty, and I found myself swallowing hard. I turned around and kept moving, walking faster. A few minutes later, I saw a man jogging ahead of me. He had headphones on. I wanted to call out to him, but I felt embarrassed. What would I even say? "Hey, have you seen a weird dog with glowing eyes?" That sounded ridiculous in my head. I decided to keep quiet and finish my lap as quickly as possible. I went home that night feeling uneasy again. This time I stayed up for hours, pacing around my small living room. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see a pair of yellow eyes staring at me from the parking lot. I knew it was an irrational thought, but I couldn't shake it. Over the next week, I tried returning to the lake several times. Some nights I saw no sign of the dog. Other nights I thought I spotted a black shape slipping behind a tree or vanishing into a cluster of bushes. I never got a clear look, and I never heard a bark, whine, or growl. Just a flash of dark fur and then nothing. Each time it happened, I felt my muscles tighten. My shoulders got stiff, and my breathing became shallow. My mind would race, thinking, where is it now? Is it following me again? I stopped talking to people around the lake. I used to greet fellow walkers and wave at passers-by. Now I kept my head down, scanning the periphery, trying to catch the dog if it showed up. Sometimes I felt a faint sense of shame, like I was letting my nerves get the best of me. But each time I spotted that flicker of movement, that tension came roaring back. My heart would pound, and a surge of adrenaline would make me want to leave immediately. One night, I decided to do something different. I brought a small bag of dog treats. I figured if it really was a stray, maybe I could coax it close enough to check for a collar. I walked slowly, calling out in a gentle voice, "Hey, I brought something for you. I just want to help." My voice echoed a bit in the still air. I held out a treat, but nothing approached. I left a few pieces on a bench, hoping that might attract it. After a few minutes, I heard a rustling in some bushes behind me. I turned around, shining my flashlight. The leaves shook, and I saw the outline of the dog's head. Its eyes caught the light. I tried to stay still, but my pulse was already racing. The dog blinked, then moved backward, disappearing into the darkness. I checked the bench a few times, but nothing touched the treats while I was there. From that point on, I never knew if I would see the dog or not. Some nights I managed to go through my entire walk in relative peace. Other nights I caught those eyes reflecting off my flashlight or the dim lampposts. It became a pattern. Appear, watch, vanish. Every time it happened, my stomach churned and my hands trembled a bit. Sometimes I felt silly for being so jumpy, but there was something about those eyes that unsettled me. They always looked steady, not wild or fearful. Last Thursday, I had one of the strangest moments yet. I was on my second lap, halfway around, when I felt a presence close behind me. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, and I stopped in my tracks. I turned around, phone flashlight ready, but I saw no one. As soon as I turned forward again, I caught a glimpse of the dog standing on the path in front of me, maybe 15 feet away. That was the first time it stood ahead instead of behind. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt sweat on my forehead. I lifted the flashlight, illuminating its face. The dog didn't flinch. Its fur looked matted in places, and its eyes glowed in that odd yellowish way. I took a step toward it, hand extended, murmuring, "It's okay." The dog backed away slowly, then turned and darted off the path, disappearing behind a tall cluster of reeds. I hurried after it, shining my light, but by the time I reached that spot, I saw only ripples in the water near the lake's edge. I spent the next hour circling the lake, searching for it, but found nothing. No sounds, no shapes, no footprints in the mud. I went home frustrated and shaky. I had trouble sleeping. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that image of the dog's yellow eyes staring back at me. Ever since then, I've changed how I walk. I keep looking behind me every couple of minutes, scanning for any shape or movement. I try to tell myself there's a logical explanation. Maybe the dog belongs to someone nearby. Maybe it's shy or has a habit of hiding. But deep down, I can't shake that feeling that it's waiting to show up when I least expect it. There's a lingering sense of unease I can't get rid of. Even now, as I'm talking about it, I feel my shoulders tense and a slight tremor in my hands. Sometimes I consider switching to a different jogging path or trying the gym instead. But I can't let this fear control me. I still go to that lake at night because it's part of my routine, and I don't like feeling pushed out of my own space. Yet, every time I walk past a dark section of the path or hear a soft rustle in the bushes, my body tenses up. My eyes dart around, and my breath quickens. I remember that first time I locked eyes with that dog, and my heart thumps a little harder. I haven't seen it for a couple of days now, which makes me uneasy in a different way. I wonder if it's still there, watching from a distance. I catch myself glancing back all the time. I can't tell if I'm imagining shapes in the shadows, or if it really is there. I just know that if it wants to appear, it will. And if it decides to vanish again, I won't be able to stop it. I guess I've come to accept that for now, but I'll never walk that loop without being on high alert again. All it took was one strange dog with those unnerving yellow eyes, and now everything feels different. I'm not sure when or if I'll ever feel completely relaxed by that lake at night again. I wasn't prepared for the feeling I got when I walked into that building on my first day. It wasn't just the dim lights in the lobby or the echo of my footsteps against the empty walls. It was the sense that something in there didn't like visitors after dark. This is how it started. I took the job because it paid well, and I needed a change. They placed me in a large office tower in a half-abandoned business district. Most of the surrounding buildings were empty, and the ones still in use had only a handful of employees. My new office was on the 8th floor, which looked like it belonged to another decade. The carpeting in the hall was worn and stained. The walls had scuff marks that no one ever bothered to paint over. The fluorescent lights hummed when I walked by. In the morning, maybe a few people showed up, but they stayed in their own corners. The place was a maze of identical hallways and empty cubicles. I didn't mind at first. I liked the peace and quiet. On my first day, I noticed the silence right away. It was like the building swallowed all sound. Even the air conditioner made a muffled noise, as if it was trying not to disturb anyone. My office was down the corridor from the elevator. It had a big window facing a row of old warehouses. The view wasn't special, but it was something. I set up my computer, arranged my few personal items on the desk, and settled in. I could work at my own pace. The job was mostly administrative tasks and report writing. It felt like I could focus better without people constantly walking around. There was a break room on the opposite side of the floor, but it was always empty. I saw it only in passing when I went to get coffee. The overhead light in there flickered, like it was on its last leg. No one ever replaced it, so it just flickered whenever it felt like it. I had a normal routine for the first few weeks. I'd come in around 9, finish up by 5 or 6, and leave. I didn't know any of my colleagues well. I recognized a few faces in the lobby elevator in the morning, but no one spoke. The whole place felt sleepy. Sometimes I'd hear a door close far down the hall, but I wouldn't see anyone. I figured they kept different hours. Then one evening, I had to stay late. It was a Friday and I had a deadline for a big report. I felt confident I could wrap it up in a couple of hours. By 7, the entire floor felt deserted. The hallway lights near the elevator turned off automatically, but the ones near my office were still on. The air felt stale and the hum of the fluorescents grew louder because there were no other sounds. I tried not to pay attention. I put on my headphones, listened to some background music, and typed away. Around 8, I realized I was hungry. I hadn't seen a cafeteria or any restaurants within walking distance since most places closed early. I decided to power through the hunger and get the report finished. While I worked, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the light in the corridor across from me was flickering. It wasn't unusual. Lights in this place always seemed to flicker, but this time, it was flicking in a steady rhythm, like someone was flipping the switch on and off. I tried to ignore it, but it went on for a while. It started getting on my nerves, so I got up to check. I figured maybe it was a wiring issue or something that needed a quick fix. When I stepped into the hall, the light stopped flickering. It was steady, like I'd imagined the whole thing. I walked a bit down the hall, looked around, and didn't see anyone. The entire floor looked empty. The break room door was shut, the elevator area was dark, and all the other offices were locked. I shrugged and went back to my desk. I put my headphones on again and opened the report file. I was about to type when the sound in my headphones cranked up to maximum volume without warning. The sudden blast of noise shot adrenaline through my body. I jumped, yanked off the headphones, and fumbled for the computer volume controls. I stared at the screen, but the volume icon showed it was at a normal level. I lowered it all the way, thinking maybe I'd accidentally pressed something. Then I tried again. The moment I put the headphones back on, the volume went to maximum again. The music blasted my ears. My hands shook a little as I turned off the entire computer. I expected the sound to stop. It didn't. The headphones were still screaming music at top volume, even though my computer screen was black. It felt like my heart was pounding in my throat. I unplugged the headphone cable, but the music kept going for a second, then abruptly cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. I stood there, holding the headphone cable in my hand, breathing hard. I could hear my pulse. My scalp was tingling. I tried to calm down, but something about that moment felt wrong. My computer was off, so how did the headphones keep playing music? I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe some weird electrical feedback or a short circuit in the headphone jack. I sat back down, waited for my heartbeat to slow, and turned the computer on again. Everything loaded normally. I tested the volume. It seemed fine, but my nerves were shot. I couldn't concentrate on the report. My eyes kept wandering to the time in the corner of the screen. It was almost 9. The building was dark outside my office. I had this urge to leave, but I still had work to do. I ended up forcing myself to finish one more section of the report. My leg bounced up and down under the desk. Every tiny noise made me jump. The air conditioner switched on, and I felt my chest tighten. My eyes darted to the hallway, expecting to see the lights flickering. They stayed steady. I tried to shake off the panic. I finished typing, saved my work, and packed up to go home. As I headed for the elevator, the corridor light began flickering again. This time, I didn't look back. I pressed the elevator button, but it took forever to arrive. I stood there in the dark, gripping my bag, glancing over my shoulder. My skin felt cold, and my mouth went dry. Finally, the elevator arrived. I stepped in, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the door close. I felt a jolt in my stomach as the elevator descended, and the moment I hit the ground floor, I rushed out to the parking lot. There were only a few cars left. It was quiet. I got into my car and left. That night, I didn't sleep well. My mind kept replaying the incident with the headphones. I tried to explain it away. Maybe my computer software malfunctioned. Maybe there was some automatic volume booster that I had turned on by accident. But it bothered me enough that I dreaded going back to work on Monday. The weekend passed slowly. I told a friend about it, but I left out some details. I didn't want to sound paranoid. He thought it was just a hardware glitch or some electrical surge in an old building. I decided that must be the case. When Monday came, I went in at my usual time. The building felt the same in the morning as it always did. Quiet, a little sad, mostly empty. I felt silly for being so nervous. I went through the day without any issues. I didn't stay late. The same thing happened the following days. Everything was fine if I left before 7. I still noticed the flickering lights sometimes, but I didn't pay much attention to them. I did my job and went home. A week later, I got stuck with another late assignment. I told myself I'd work faster so I could leave by 6, but the tasks piled up and I lost track of time. By the time I checked the clock, it was 7:30. I felt a lump in my throat. I tried to ignore it. The floor was empty again. The cleaning staff never came up that high, at least not that I'd ever seen. The hallway was silent. I got the same uneasy feeling in my stomach. My hands felt sweaty on the keyboard. I remembered the headphone incident and decided not to use them this time. I played some low music through the computer's speakers while I worked. I hoped it would keep me relaxed. Around 8:15, I heard a door slam somewhere on the floor. It echoed down the hallway. I jerked upright in my chair. I listened for footsteps, but I heard nothing. The building's temperature felt colder than usual, like the air conditioner was cranked up too high. I stood up and peeked out of my office. The corridor light was on, but the far end was dark. I didn't see anyone. My mouth felt dry. I decided to check if maybe a coworker was still around. I walked down the hallway, my shoes making a dull thud on the old carpet. The break room door was open, but the room was dark inside. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out completely. I turned away, but as I stepped back into the corridor, I heard a faint rustling sound behind me. It sounded like a plastic bag moving across the floor. I froze, then slowly turned around. The break room was empty. I couldn't see any trash on the floor. My heart sped up. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I backed away and headed toward my office. I decided enough was enough. I saved my work. I packed up. I started walking toward the elevator. As I reached for the elevator button, I heard the same rhythmic flickering of the lights behind me. The pulses were slower this time, almost deliberate. My scalp tingled. The elevator doors didn't open quickly enough. I tapped my foot, breathing fast. When the doors finally slid open, I rushed inside and hit the button for the lobby. The doors shut, and I watched the floor number indicators count down. When I reached the lobby, I almost ran across the empty reception area to the parking lot. My eyes stung from staring at my screen all day, and my head pounded. I just wanted to get home. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid staying late, but my workload didn't let up. I kept noticing that as the clock approached 7:30 or 8 Maui, the building's atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier. The lights flickered more often. The entire place got colder, like the ventilation system was set to a lower temperature at night. I never saw anyone else working late. I never saw the cleaning crew. I started having dreams about the flickering lights. In those dreams, I'd be in the hallway and the lights would flicker faster and faster, then explode in a flash. I'd wake up covered in sweat, my heart pounding, confused about where I was. 2 weeks ago, I had my worst late night. I was behind on a project, so I stayed until nearly 10. I felt on edge the whole time. Every time I heard a small sound, like the building settling or the elevator mechanism, I'd tense up. My shoulders ached from stress. I got up around 9:30 to stretch. I walked slowly down the corridor, telling myself to calm down. When I passed the break room, the door was wide open. The overhead light in there flickered like it always did, but this time I swore I saw a shape by the counter. It was just a quick glimpse, but I jumped. My heart thumped so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I snapped my head back for a better look, but the room was empty. The door creaked as it swung slightly. I didn't move any closer. My skin crawled. My breathing grew fast. I hurried back to my office and tried to collect my things as quickly as I could. I logged off my computer, grabbed my coat, and headed for the elevator. The corridor felt longer than usual. My feet felt heavy. I kept looking behind me, expecting to see something or someone following me. When I got to the elevator, the panel read that it was on the first floor. I pressed the button, and it started coming up. It took a while. I tapped my fingers against my leg, my throat dry. The flickering started again. At first, it was the light near the break room, then the one near the far corner office. Each section of the corridor turned off and on, one after the other, as if someone was walking along flipping switches. I heard a buzzing sound from the overhead fixtures. My skin broke out in goosebumps. The elevator finally arrived. As soon as the doors opened, I scrambled inside and pressed the lobby button. The doors closed and I felt the cabin jolt downward. I stared at the ceiling. My reflection on the metal door looked nervous, pale. I tried to breathe normally, but my heart didn't slow down until I was already in my car, leaving the parking lot. Since then, I haven't stayed later than 6. I rearranged my schedule to come in early so I can leave on time. I've had a few close calls with deadlines, but I can't bring myself to stay past sunset. Sometimes around 5:30, I start getting jittery. I keep glancing at the time, recalling that moment when my headphones blasted music, or that second when the hallway lights flickered in a steady rhythm. No one else mentions anything weird about this building, but I rarely see my coworkers for more than a few minutes anyway. If I have to send an important file, I do it from home or from a coffee shop. I'm not comfortable in that place after dark. It feels like the building shifts at night, like the floors stretch into something empty and cold. I still don't have an explanation for what happened with my headphones that first night. I tried to talk about it with a local IT guy, but he just shrugged and said it sounded like a freak hardware error. All I know is that it felt too sudden, too intentional. The flickering lights are easier to write off as old wiring. But the pattern in their flicker felt strange. It wasn't random. It was timed, as if someone or something controlled it. Right now, I stick to my early schedule. I keep my phone charged in case I ever get stuck late again. I don't listen to music through headphones in the office. If I ever have to stay after dark, I don't plan on investigating any strange lights. If I hear doors slamming or see the break room door open by itself, I'm leaving immediately. I don't care about missing a deadline or risking my job. There's a line between being dedicated and ignoring every alarm bell in my head. I don't know if it's just my imagination. Maybe this old building has a bunch of electrical problems, and I got spooked once, so now I notice every flicker and every sound. but my gut tells me otherwise. Every time the clock hits around 8, the atmosphere changes. The lights flicker a certain way. The corridors seem darker, even with the fluorescents on. And I remember how it felt when the music blasted through my headphones, long after the computer was shut down. That's why I'm careful now. That's why I rush out before night falls. And that's why, even though I try to act normal, I can't shake the chills I get every time I look at that clock and see it getting close to the hour when everything started. I'm still working there because I need the paycheck, but I don't feel safe. Even during the day, the building feels hollow, like it's waiting. I try not to linger in the halls or the elevator. I keep my head down and do my job. Every night I leave on time, glance over my shoulder, and head straight for my car. I don't think this building is haunted in the typical sense. I've never seen a ghost. I've never heard a voice. But whatever is behind the flickering lights and the sudden noise in my headphones is enough to keep me on edge. I can't forget that night, and I don't want to repeat it. So I keep my distance. I try to push it out of my mind. But every time I pass the 8th floor corridor, I remember that moment when I realized the building wakes up at night. And that memory is enough to send a shiver through me even now. I still remember the day I opened that old wooden box for the first time. I didn't think much of it at first. I just wanted to see what my grandfather had tucked away on the top shelf of his closet. But the moment I saw that chain with the odd pendant, something shifted in me. It wasn't some dramatic moment with thunder outside or anything like that. I just felt an odd tension in my body, like a small vibration in my hands. Now I wish I had left it all alone. My name is Rick. I'm 38. I live by myself in a small house just outside of town, and I don't consider myself the superstitious type. My grandfather passed a few months ago, and I was left with a few old trinkets, stuff with little monetary value, mostly sentimental. Among those items, there was this box, maybe 8 inches long, 4 inches wide, made of dark wood with a single brass hinge. It looked worn out, like it had been around for decades. I found it on the top shelf of his bedroom closet when I was clearing out his things. Inside, resting on a tiny piece of faded velvet, was that chain with a pendant. It didn't look extraordinary at first. It was just a dull silver color, but when I picked it up, I got a weird jolt. It wasn't a strong shock, more like a static zap, but without any pain. My hands shook for a moment. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just tired from cleaning all day. Then I noticed the smell. It was metallic, but not in the usual way. It was stronger, almost sour, like steel that had been sitting in water for too long. I slipped the chain into my pocket without much thought and took the rest of the items, letters, postcards, an old watch, and some other minor things, out of the house. I placed everything in a cardboard box in my car and drove home. By the time I arrived, I noticed my pocket felt warm. Not hot enough to alarm me, just warm in a weird way. I chalked it up to my own body heat, or maybe just my imagination. Once I got inside, I set the new box of grandfather's stuff on the kitchen table. I laid out the items. The watch was broken, the letters were old and yellowed, and the postcards were from vacations he took decades ago. Then I pulled out the chain again. I held it in my hand, and there it was, the slight tremble in my fingers. It didn't hurt, but it caught my attention. I tried to look at the pendant more closely, but it had no markings or design that I could see. It was just an oval piece of metal, smooth on both sides. I'm not the kind of person who gets easily scared. I was curious, that's all. So I decided to keep it on the kitchen counter. I left it there while I heated some leftovers in the microwave. But the longer I stayed in that room, the more I felt something off. My ears started ringing, like a faint buzzing. I'd had tinnitus before, but this was different. It came and went in waves. I looked at the chain on the counter, and I swear that buzzing seemed to spike whenever I looked directly at it. Later that night, I had trouble sleeping. I got into bed around 11, but I tossed and turned for at least 2 hours. When I finally fell asleep, I had a nightmare. It was the first of many. In that dream, I was in my old room at my grandfather's place, searching through an empty closet. I felt an urge to find something, but I didn't know what it was. The wall started shaking and the door slammed shut, locking me inside. I heard a scraping sound, like metal dragging across wood. I woke up drenched in sweat. When I turned on the bedside lamp, I noticed scratch marks on my left forearm. They were thin, not deep enough to bleed much, just shallow red lines. I rubbed my arm, confused. My fingernails were short, so it didn't make sense. I sat there breathing hard, feeling my heart pound. I tried to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe I scratched myself on a piece of furniture or something, but there was nothing sharp in my bed. The next morning, I felt uneasy. My arm stung a bit, and I found myself looking around my room more carefully than usual. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone, but of course I was. I got up, showered, got dressed, and went into the kitchen. The chain was still there on the counter. That metallic smell was in the air, heavier than before. It almost made me gag when I got too close. I decided to put the chain back in its wooden box. I placed it in the box, then slid the box into a drawer in the living room. For the rest of the day, I tried to go about my usual routine. Some errands, a bit of work at my computer, a quick run for groceries. But I felt on edge, like I had an itch in the back of my skull. My hands trembled slightly, even without touching the chain, and I still heard that faint buzzing now and then. That night, I had another nightmare. This time, I was standing in my living room, and the lights were off. The chain was on the floor, glowing faintly in the dark. I reached down to pick it up, but my hand wouldn't move the way I wanted. Instead, it felt like something guided my hand to grab the pendant. Then everything went pitch black. I snapped awake. My heart hammered, and I was sweating again. I turned on the light and checked my arms. More scratches, this time on both forearms. They burned when I touched them. I started to worry. I told my friend Marcus about what was happening. We met for coffee the next morning. I showed him the chain, which I had put back in the box, but I brought it with me to explain everything. He suggested I just leave it alone. He thought maybe it was messing with my head, especially given my grandfather's passing and all the stress I was under. He said, "Dude, just put that thing away. Don't wear it. Don't touch it. Keep it locked up." I decided to follow his advice. I left it in the box and put it on the highest shelf in my closet once I got home. But things got worse. Even without touching it, I started hearing strange noises in the house at night. It sounded like soft footsteps on the hardwood floor, usually around midnight. I'd jump out of bed, rush to the hallway, and turn on the lights. No one was ever there, but the air felt heavier, like a humid day, but without the heat. There were times I stood there, heart pounding, sure that I saw something move in the corner of my eye. But when I turned, there was nothing. I began to dread going to sleep. The nightmares didn't stop, and every time I woke up, I found new superficial scratches. Some were on my shoulders, some on my back. I tried sleeping with a shirt on, but it made no difference. The marks showed up anyway. My nails were still short, and the angles of the scratches didn't make sense for self-inflicted wounds. I felt my sanity slipping. One night, I decided to investigate every inch of the closet. I took out the box with the chain. I turned on every light in the room. I set the box on the floor and just stared at it, trying to gather the courage to open it. My heart pounded in my chest and my breathing got shallow. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I flipped the lid open. The chain sat there looking dull as ever, but it practically radiated that metallic smell. The buzzing sound grew louder in my ears. My fingertips felt cold. I reached in and grabbed the chain. My hands shook more intensely this time. I held it up close to my face, turning the pendant over, trying to find anything. An engraving, a mark, a symbol. Nothing. The surface was smooth, completely blank. But it felt like it had a pulse, like it was alive in some twisted way. My hands felt weaker the longer I held it, so I shoved it back in the box and slammed the lid. I tried to sleep after that, but I kept hearing faint clicking noises in the closet. like metal tapping against wood. Every little sound in the house startled me. When I did drift off, I dreamed of being dragged across the hallway, unable to speak or resist. In the dream, I felt a heavy weight on my chest, pressing down, suffocating me. I woke up gasping, sweat dripping down my neck, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My arms were covered in red streaks, stinging so bad that I had to get up and rinse them under cold water. After that, I couldn't stand to keep the chain in the house anymore. I decided I would leave it somewhere else, maybe in a storage unit or at a friend's place. But every time I looked at the box, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. My gut told me that once I took the box out of the closet, something would follow me. I don't have any logical reason for that feeling, but it was strong. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried to distract myself with TV, music, even some light reading, but the same pattern repeated each night. Strange footsteps, soft scraping noises, nightmares, new scratches. I stopped inviting people over because I felt embarrassed. My house looked normal during the day, but at night it turned into a place I hardly recognized. Every shadow seemed longer and darker. Every door creaked louder. I started triple-checking the locks. I even bought new cameras and installed them around the exterior, but none of that helped. One night I texted Marcus around 2 a.m. telling him I couldn't handle it anymore. He told me to get rid of the chain permanently, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it in the trash or bury it somewhere. It belonged to my grandfather, and despite everything, I felt weirdly guilty about discarding it. I decided maybe I could store it at Marcus's place. He was a close friend, but he lived about an hour away. That evening, I packed the chain in the wooden box and wrapped the box in an old towel. I put it in a paper bag and loaded it into my car. My plan was to drive to Marcus's house first thing the next morning. But that night, I barely slept. I kept the bedroom door locked, but around midnight, I heard knocking on the walls. It started in the living room, then moved to the hallway, then right outside my bedroom. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. I clenched my fists, sweat gathering on my palms. My heart beat so hard that I felt lightheaded. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting in bed with a baseball bat in my hands, facing the door. The knocking stopped around 3 a.m. After sunrise, I felt some relief. I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and headed for the car. When I opened the trunk, the paper bag was torn. The towel was half on the floor. The wooden box was still there, but the lid was ajar. I felt a jolt in my stomach. My hands shook as I checked inside. The chain was tangled, as if someone had yanked on it. I didn't see any sign of a break-in, and I couldn't figure out how the bag got ripped or how the box opened on its own. I wrapped it all up again, slammed the trunk shut, and drove straight to Marcus's place. The whole way there, I had the same ear-buzzing feeling, like pressure building. My mouth felt dry, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat. When I finally got to Marcus's house, he opened the door and saw the state I was in, pale, shaky, eyes bloodshot. I dropped the box on his coffee table and said, "I can't keep this in my house anymore." He nodded, though he looked uneasy. We checked the chain again, but it looked the same as always, blank and dull. The smell was intense, though, and Marcus even recoiled when he got too close. We sealed the box with packing tape and stuffed it in an old chest he had in his garage. I stayed at his place that night. It was the first full night of sleep I had in weeks. No footsteps, no knocking, no nightmares, no scratches. The next morning, I felt like a new person, though I was still jittery. I told Marcus I'd come back in a few days to see how things were going. So far, I haven't had any more nightmares or unexplained scratches, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that chain isn't done with me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night at home, sure that I hear that faint metal scraping, but it fades when I fully awaken. Maybe it's just my imagination, maybe not. All I know is that I can't handle having that thing near me again. If it stays taped up in that chest and I don't have to deal with the nightmares anymore, maybe I'll finally get some peace. But every now and then, in the quiet moments, my hands still tremble and my ears still buzz. and I can't help thinking about that warm spot in my pocket the first time I brought the chain home. I wonder what it really was, and I wonder if, one day, I'll hear that same knocking outside my bedroom door again. I still remember the first time I saw the old military warehouse. It was a blocky gray building near a deserted road outside town. The chain link fence around it had gaps, and the main gate hung on one hinge. I noticed broken windows, rusted doors, and tall grass growing through cracks in the pavement. Something about it pulled me in right away. I couldn't ignore the urge to see what was inside, no matter how run down it looked. I told my friend Mark about it, and we decided to check it out that same week. On a late afternoon, we drove my small car to the edge of the property. I parked behind some bushes so no one would notice us. The air felt heavy with humidity, and the sky was a dull gray. I heard crickets even though it wasn't dark yet, and each chirp made me feel more aware of my surroundings. The fence was easy to climb, and after a few minutes, we stood near the main door of the warehouse. The door was a thick metal slab that had a large dent near the handle. It looked like someone tried to break it open a long time ago. Mark pressed on it, and it gave way with a screech. We stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was a stale, dusty smell. My nose twitched, and I tried not to breathe too deeply. The floor was concrete with cracks all over. Empty crates and broken chairs lay scattered around. Some overhead lights were still there, but they were covered in grime and didn't work. The space felt massive, even though most of it was empty. My footsteps echoed when I moved, and that echo made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there. Mark nudged my shoulder and pointed to the right. There was a narrow hallway leading away from the main area. It had a single flickering emergency light at the far end, but the bulb must have been on its last leg. The hallway walls had peeling paint, and parts of the ceiling looked like they might collapse. I could see water stains and exposed wiring overhead. I felt uneasy, like I was walking into someone's forgotten territory. We passed a few doors that were either locked or blocked by old furniture. One had a sign that said Command Office, but when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. We kept going. The deeper we went, the darker it got. I used my phone flashlight to see. The beam lit up a broken filing cabinet on the floor, scattered papers, and a desk flipped on its side. Mark stayed close behind me. He didn't say much, but I could sense his tension. His breathing was shallow, and he glanced over his shoulder every few seconds. Eventually, we reached a small room with a single table in the center. The ceiling lamp was broken, so it was dim, only lit by our flashlights. On the table, there was an old notebook. The cover was torn, and it looked like it had water damage. I picked it up. The pages were yellow and stained, with handwriting so messy I could barely read it. I saw random dates, incomplete sentences, and mentions of night patrols. Some lines described strange noises at night. Another part mentioned voices calling to the soldiers on guard duty. I felt a chill run through my arms when I saw the words voices calling. I tried to imagine the scenario. A soldier alone at night hearing something that sounded like a person speaking, only there was nobody there. My heartbeat sped up. I handed the notebook to Mark so he could see for himself. He frowned at the messed up writing. He squinted at a passage that described footsteps echoing in the corridors. Then he shut the notebook and handed it back. He didn't say a word. We heard something from down the hall, like a distant thump. It sounded like a door closing, but it came in a slow, repeating pattern. I snapped my head up. Mark looked at me, and I saw the same question on his face. Who else could be in here? The rhythmic thumping continued for a few seconds, then it stopped. My stomach twisted in knots. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind pushing a door. The building was old, and there were plenty of damaged areas. I figured maybe a breeze was coming in from a hole in the wall, causing something to bang back and forth, but I didn't feel any breeze. The air was still and stuffy. I put the notebook in my backpack and gestured for Mark to follow me. We walked toward the direction of the sound, our footsteps slow and careful. My palms were sweaty, and I kept my phone flashlight aimed ahead of us. The corridor opened into another large section of the warehouse. This one had an assortment of metal cabinets, lockers, and shelves pushed against the walls. Some lockers were dented or rusted, and a few had doors hanging off the hinges. The place smelled like old metal and damp concrete. Our flashlights caught drifting particles of dust floating in the air. We checked a few of the lockers out of curiosity. Most were empty. One had a stack of moldy papers. Another had a single boot that looked torn and covered in dust. I heard a faint dripping sound somewhere, like water leaking through the roof. I felt my shoulders tense up with every step, worried that we might see a rat or something worse. But there was nothing. No sign of life at all, just musty air and decaying furniture. Suddenly, one of the locker doors swung open. It made a harsh screech that echoed in the empty space. I jumped back, almost dropping my phone. Mark let out a sharp gasp. The door just stood there wide open. There was no draft, no wind, no movement in the air. But the locker door had swung open on its own. My heart pounded in my ears. I clenched my flashlight so hard my hand started to cramp. I quickly stepped forward and slammed the locker shut. The door banged closed with a loud clang, and I felt the vibration in my arm. I didn't want to stand there any longer. Mark and I exchanged one terrified glance, and we both knew we needed to leave. We walked fast, retracing our steps toward the main entrance. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. I kept thinking about the notebook. Those lines about voices wouldn't leave my head. We got out of the warehouse and stumbled into the open air. I breathed in as deeply as I could, even though the air still felt humid and heavy. We ran back to my car without saying anything. Once we were inside, Mark exhaled loudly and muttered something about never going back. I nodded, turned the key, and drove out of there. My hands shook on the steering wheel until we reached the main road. That night, I couldn't sleep well. My body felt restless, and my thoughts kept drifting back to the sound of that locker door and the strange pounding noise. I thought I heard faint murmurs in my bedroom, but I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off. My dreams were chaotic. I saw long corridors that looked like the warehouse hallways. I heard voices echoing my name. I jolted awake with sweat running down my forehead. My t-shirt clung to my skin, and my chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. The next morning, I felt groggy. My mind was cloudy. I sent Mark a text to see how he was doing. He wrote back that he was fine, but hadn't slept much either. I didn't mention my nightmares. I just said I was glad we got out before anything worse happened. I spent most of the day trying to push the whole experience out of my mind, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that rusted locker door swinging open. My neck tensed, and my stomach turned. I tried to watch some TV to distract myself, but I kept replaying the events in my head. The second night after our visit was worse. I had another dream where I wandered the same corridors alone. My flashlight flickered, and I heard the rhythmic banging sound echoing in the distance. Then I heard whispered voices calling my name. My heart pounded in the dream, and I felt my hands shaking. I saw a faint figure in the shadows, but I couldn't tell who or what it was. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat again. I threw my covers aside and sat on the edge of my bed, breathing hard and trying to calm down. The following days, I started to feel jumpy and distracted. At work, I made mistakes I never used to make. My boss asked if something was wrong. I just said I hadn't been sleeping well. I didn't want to explain the whole warehouse story. I figured nobody would believe me anyway. Mark and I talked a few times, and he said he was also getting weird vibes, like he'd turn off a light in his house and hear a faint click in another room. He told me he felt like the building was stuck in his head. We agreed not to go back there, but we couldn't shake the feeling that the place had somehow clung to us. Every night I lay in bed, dreading the moment when I'd close my eyes. I tried sleeping pills, but they only made my mind hazy. I still dreamt of those corridors, that empty locker, the banging noise. Sometimes in my dreams, I caught glimpses of the old notebook's pages, words scrawled in the same messy handwriting telling me to listen. In those moments, my heartbeat would spike, and I'd wake up gasping for air. I'd reach for my phone, but I never wanted to look at the time. It always felt like it was the middle of the night. One evening, I decided to open that notebook again. I pulled it out of my backpack, which I'd dumped in my closet. It smelled musty, like the warehouse. I felt a wave of nausea just holding it. I turned the brittle pages carefully, shining a small lamp on them so I wouldn't strain my eyes. The text was mostly unreadable, but I saw references to guard duty, cold spots in the halls, and inexplicable knocks. The soldier who wrote it seemed unsettled. He mentioned being afraid to sleep, complaining that he heard voices outside his quarters. I felt my arms trembling as I recognized the same kind of fear I was experiencing now. I thought about throwing the notebook away or burning it, but some part of me hesitated. I feared destroying it might worsen the situation. I know that sounds irrational, but I couldn't help it. My nerves were frayed, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I ended up shoving the notebook back into a drawer and slamming it shut. My stomach churned, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead. That night, I heard a sound in my living room around midnight. It sounded like a chair scraping across the floor. My heart raced, and I got out of bed to check. I flicked on every light as I walked through my small apartment. Everything looked normal. No chairs had moved. Nothing was out of place. My hands were shaking when I grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen. I drank it in one gulp and realized my breathing was ragged. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths until I felt somewhat calmer. The next few nights followed the same pattern. Nightmares, strange noises, a constant feeling of unease. I'd jolt awake with the sensation that someone was standing over me or whispering in my ear. I'd check my bedroom door, the corners of the room, the hallway, and find nothing. I'd try to tell myself it was all in my head. I tried playing music or leaving a TV on for background noise, but that only made me more aware of every sound. After a week of this, I called Mark and asked him if he was experiencing the same thing. He admitted he was still feeling on edge, but insisted that the worst of it seemed to be behind him. He told me to relax and that maybe my mind was more sensitive to the place than his. I got mad at him for dismissing how intense it felt. He apologized, but didn't know what else to say. I started to consider going back to the warehouse just to see if there was something I could set right or figure out. The idea of returning made my stomach turn, but I was desperate. I thought maybe I could uncover more about the place, why it got abandoned, who wrote that notebook, and what was causing the weird experiences. But every time I pictured myself stepping into that dark corridor, I felt a sudden spike of panic. My mouth went dry and my heartbeat raced. One night I dreamt again about the locker opening by itself. In the dream, I stood there, frozen, while the door swung outward with a deafening squeal. I felt like I was suffocating. Then a voice whispered my name right behind my ear. I spun around and woke up drenched in sweat. My throat was dry and my pillow felt soaked. I grabbed my phone and realized I was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I looked around my dark bedroom. The silence pressed on my ears. My heart thudded. I noticed my closet door was slightly open, even though I always shut it. I told myself it was nothing. I walked over, closed it, and locked it. I stood there in the dark for a moment, feeling my skin prickling. Then I climbed back in bed, not sure if I could sleep. I'm still stuck with these nightmares. Every time I close my eyes, that place returns to me. I see the dust-covered halls, the rusted lockers, the faint light from my phone scanning across the walls. I hear that banging noise echoing in my mind, like a distant reminder of something I can't escape. My body jolts awake again and again, my heart pounding so hard it hurts. I've considered seeing a therapist, but I'm afraid they'll think I'm making it up or overreacting. I can't shake the feeling that something latched onto me that day in the warehouse. I don't know what it is. I don't have any proof aside from the nightmares and the notes in that old notebook. There are no bruises on my skin, no actual injuries, no direct signs. Yet the fear is real. It's a clench in my stomach, a wave of nausea, a rush of adrenaline whenever I remember the screech of metal doors opening by themselves. I keep telling myself it'll pass if I just wait. But it's been a while, and the dreams haven't stopped. They come in waves, leaving me drained and sweaty. During the day, I fight the urge to look over my shoulder or check my closet. At night, I do everything possible to fall asleep, but nothing works for long. I lie there, my mind drifting back to that abandoned military warehouse, wondering if there's more hidden inside those walls. Every little sound in my apartment makes my heartbeat jump. Every small draft of air against my neck sets me on edge. Mark doesn't want to talk about it much anymore. He says he's moved on, and maybe he has. But for me, those few hours inside that building changed something. I still picture the old desks covered in dust, the corridors stretching out into darkness, and the broken windows letting in that gloomy light. I can't forget how the locker door swung open by itself, how the screech filled my ears, and how a chill ran down my spine in that moment. It all felt so physical, so immediate, and so impossible to dismiss. I don't know what happens next, but I can't keep living with these sleepless nights. Part of me wonders if I should go back and face it, maybe close whatever door I opened. Another part of me wants to pretend it never happened, to toss the notebook in the trash and move on. Neither option gives me any sense of relief. Right now, I'm just sitting here, my heart pounding, the memory still fresh, waiting for the next night to fall. And I know when I close my eyes, I'll hear those voices again, echoing in the darkness, reminding me of a place I wish I'd never found. I woke up on Saturday at around 3 in the morning because I heard my phone ringing. The sound was muffled. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My eyes were half open, and I wasn't sure if that vibration in my ears was real or some leftover noise from whatever I'd been dreaming about. But then it kept going, and I realized it was definitely my phone. I never keep it on my nightstand at night. I place it on my dresser, or sometimes even on the kitchen counter. That night, I had left it charging on the far side of my bedroom near the closet. It was far enough that I had to get up, turn on a light, and walk across the room to answer it. I pushed my blanket aside and put my feet on the floor. My head felt heavy. My eyes stung a bit because I hadn't slept long. I checked the clock on my bedside table, and it said 3:02 a.m. I remember sighing and wondering who could be calling me at that hour. My mind jumped to thoughts of an emergency, but then I realized I didn't hear my usual ringtone. It sounded slightly muted, like someone had thrown a sweater on top of it or something like that. I walked over, flipped on the small lamp on the shelf, and saw that my phone was indeed under my jacket. I had tossed my jacket over the dresser earlier in the evening, and it must have slid over the phone. That's why the sound was so muffled. I grabbed the phone and looked at the screen. I expected to see a name or at least a number, but the screen was blank. It only showed the usual icons for battery and signal strength. The phone was definitely ringing, though. I could see the call notification in the corner, but where the caller ID would normally be, there was nothing. I answered it anyway, thinking maybe it was some glitch or an unknown caller. I said hello, but I didn't hear anyone speak. There was only a light static sound. It reminded me of the faint hiss you get when you tune an old radio. I felt a tingle at the back of my neck. I said hello a second time. Still no response. I cleared my throat and said, "Is someone there?" The static continued for maybe 4 or 5 seconds before cutting out. Then the line went silent. I said, "Hello?" once more, and the call ended on its own. I stood there in my bedroom, phone in hand, heartbeat picking up speed. I told myself it was probably a wrong number. Maybe someone dialed me by accident. I stared at the screen. The call ended at 3:04 a.m. I checked the call log, but there was nothing new. No record of an incoming call. That's when I felt a knot in my stomach. My phone wasn't showing me any missed call or any received call. It was completely blank, as if nobody had phoned me at all. I shook my head and figured it was a glitch. Phones sometimes do that. Maybe the system froze. I put the phone on the dresser and returned to bed. I tried to calm down, but my mind wouldn't settle right away. My bed felt cold when I climbed back in, and I lay there with my eyes open for a while. I didn't sense any immediate danger, but I had that prickly feeling you get when you think you've heard or seen something that doesn't make sense. After about 15 minutes, I closed my eyes, forced myself to breathe slowly, and eventually drifted off again. I woke up around 9 in the morning. Sunlight was sneaking through the blinds, and I felt more rested. though a bit off. The events of the night before came back to me right away. I sat up, reached for my phone on the dresser, and saw one new voicemail notification. It showed a time of 3:04 a.m., the exact minute the phone call ended. I stared at the screen for a moment. The phone showed a blank number for the voicemail. There was no contact listed, just a dash where the caller ID should be. I felt uneasy right away. My chest tightened and I started tapping the screen to access the voicemail. I pressed play and put the phone to my ear. I expected to hear that same static or maybe a bunch of silence. Instead, I heard someone whisper my name. It was faint and distorted, like the speaker was too close to the microphone or something was interfering with the audio. I couldn't recognize the voice. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. It said my name twice, slow and garbled. Then there was this odd metallic hum in the background. I blinked a few times and felt a rush of adrenaline. The voice continued in a low murmur, repeating something I couldn't understand. It was English, I think, but the words were broken. It sounded like the voice was trying to say my name again, but kept trailing off. My heartbeat was fast and I got goosebumps on my arms. Then the message cut off suddenly, with no beep, no click, nothing. Just an abrupt end. I stood there in my bedroom, phone in my hand, trying to figure out what just happened. I glanced at my call log again. There was no number, no call entry, no record except for the voicemail icon on my screen. I checked the details of the voicemail, but the phone only showed that it was received at 3:04 a.m., and the duration was 10 seconds. No actual number was listed. My mouth was dry and my hands felt a bit clammy. I kept thinking it had to be some prank call. Maybe a friend messing with me, but nobody I knew would do something like that. They'd at least say something more obvious, or maybe just laugh. This voice sounded off, like a person speaking through a fan or a broken microphone. I replayed the voicemail once more, holding the phone in front of me this time so I could see if the progress bar revealed anything. It sounded just as strange the second time, and I still couldn't make out the words after my name. That metallic noise in the background made me feel uneasy, like there was some machinery behind the speaker. I decided to delete the voicemail because it was too creepy, and I didn't want to keep listening to it. I felt like I was doing something final, like removing evidence. But I didn't want it on my phone. The second I deleted it, I immediately regretted not saving a copy, but my gut reaction told me to get rid of it. My body was tense, and my heart was still pounding. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and just tried to breathe. I made some coffee in the kitchen, trying to shake off the nerves. The coffee machine made its usual gurgling sounds, and the smell was comforting. I sat in a chair by the window and stared at my phone. I checked my recent calls again to see if maybe the record had updated. Nothing. I called my carrier's automated line to see if there was any mention of a voicemail or call at 3:04 a.m. The system told me I had no new messages, no mention of the one I received or deleted. It was as if it never existed. I started to feel paranoid. I walked around my place, checking the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I tried to think of how someone would get a hold of my number and do something like this. My number isn't listed publicly. It felt like it had to be a mistake. But the fact that the person on the voicemail whispered my name confirmed it was meant for me. That realization made me uneasy. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weird telemarketer system glitch or some random stranger with a phone problem. Or maybe a messed up automated message. But none of that made sense. Nobody uses an automated system to whisper names in the middle of the night. I put my phone in my pocket and decided to get out of the apartment for a while. I grabbed my keys, left, and went to get a quick breakfast at a diner down the street. It was noisy in there. People chatted at tables. Silverware clinked against plates, and the smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. Even though it was comforting to be around other people, I couldn't shake the anxiety. I kept checking my phone to make sure there were no more calls. I felt my stomach twist when I thought about the voice. It kept echoing in my head. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my meal. I ate some eggs and toast, but the food tasted bland. My mind was somewhere else. After a while, I paid my bill and left. When I got outside, my phone buzzed with a text message. I felt a flash of alarm in my chest, but it was just a friend asking if I wanted to watch a game later. I typed a quick reply, telling him I might join. Then I stood on the sidewalk, feeling the phone in my hand, remembering the voicemail. I told myself not to dwell on it. I told myself it was a one-time thing. I went back home and spent some time cleaning up my living room. I put music on my speaker to fill the silence. The more I moved around, the easier it was to push away that uncomfortable feeling. I vacuumed, wiped down surfaces, and dusted a few shelves. But every time I paused, I'd think about that call. Around noon, I decided to test my phone by calling my own number from a landline I still keep for work. My cell phone rang normally. The caller ID displayed the correct number. I left myself a voicemail, and everything functioned like it should. That made me wonder how that unknown call from earlier managed to leave no trace besides a voicemail that quickly vanished. In the afternoon, I called my carrier's support line. I told the representative I had gotten a strange call that wasn't in my logs. The guy on the phone sounded confused. He pulled up my account records. He said he didn't see any calls around 3 in the morning. I asked if voicemails could appear without an associated call record. He said it's not supposed to happen. He checked a few more things and told me everything looked normal. I thanked him and hung up. My mouth felt dry, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears again. The rational part of my mind told me it was a tech glitch. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had managed to do this deliberately. The day went on. I had lunch at home, watched some TV, and tried to relax. My phone didn't ring again. I turned it off once just to reset it. Then I turned it back on and checked the voicemail box again. No new messages. I even checked the trash folder for deleted messages. It was empty. There was no trace of that distorted whisper saying my name. By early evening, I got a little restless. I stepped outside, walked around my block, and tried to clear my head. My neighborhood is usually calm on weekends, and I saw a few neighbors walking their dogs or chatting by the sidewalk. The normalcy around me felt reassuring, but every so often I'd check my phone. I'd scroll through the call history, and it was the same list of incoming and outgoing calls from the day before. Nothing new or strange. I headed back inside, made a simple dinner, and tried to watch a movie. My body felt tense. My back ached from how rigidly I was sitting. My thoughts kept going back to that voicemail. I worried it might happen again that night. I considered turning off my phone completely, but I also worried in case there was a real emergency. I didn't want to be cut off from important calls. So I turned the ringer volume way down, set the phone to vibrate, and left it in the same spot as the night before, on the dresser across the room. I tried to go to sleep at around 11, though I wasn't that tired yet. My mind was still racing. When I turned off the lights, I lay in bed staring at the shadows on the ceiling. I tried to calm myself by focusing on my breathing. I could hear every small noise, like the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Normally, I fall asleep pretty easily, but that night, I was wide awake. My eyes darted to the dresser where my phone rested. I wondered if I'd hear that muffled ring again in the middle of the night. Eventually, I fell asleep, though I'm not sure what time it was when my eyes finally closed. I slept in fits, waking up every so often to see if my phone was lighting up. At one point, I sat up and checked the time. It was around 2:45 a.m. I was sweaty and my heart was pounding. My phone was still dark and silent. I forced myself to lie back down, my pulse thumping in my chest. I kept thinking about the distorted voice repeating my name. The night passed without any more calls. In the morning, I checked my phone, and there was nothing new. No missed calls, no voicemails, no texts. I felt relieved, but also uneasy. I don't know who or what caused that call at 3 in the morning. I don't know why the number never appeared in my logs. I haven't heard from that caller again, but I can't shake the memory of that strange whisper, the sound of my name buried under that metallic noise. It makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. That's all that happened. I don't have a neat explanation. I haven't changed my phone number yet, but I've thought about it. Sometimes, late at night, I get a small ache in my chest when I remember that whisper. I haven't told many people the full story because it feels absurd, but I know what I heard. The voicemail was real, even though there's no record of it now, and I have no idea if it'll ever happen again. For now, I keep charging my phone across the room. Sometimes I even leave it in the living room. But no matter where it is, I still worry about hearing that muffled ring in the dark. I was brushing my teeth one night when I heard a faint tapping coming from somewhere near the kitchen. It was past midnight, and the rest of my apartment felt quiet and still. I shut off the faucet, stood there, and listened. My heart rate picked up right away. It wasn't a loud knock, just a tiny sound, like something brushing against glass. I dried my hands on a towel and walked toward the kitchen, making sure I moved slowly so I could pick up any other noises. At first I thought it might be the wind outside, but the air was calm. I walked around the small table, stepped toward the glass door that leads to my little outdoor area, and stared at my own reflection. There was nothing strange at that moment, just my face in the glass, a dim reflection from the overhead light. Still, something about that tapping stayed with me. I grabbed a glass of water and went back to the bathroom, trying not to think about it. But the sound bothered me enough that I had trouble sleeping. The next night, I stayed up late again. I was watching some random videos on my phone and realized it was almost 1 a.m. I felt thirsty, so I got out of bed and headed for the kitchen. The hallway was dark, and I noticed I had left the kitchen light on. I stepped inside, flipped on the faucet, and let the water run for a second. My apartment can be kind of warm at night, so I like the water chilled. As I raised my glass to drink, I glanced at the glass door on my right. It was closed, but I saw a faint reflection of myself. I had the distinct feeling that something was off, like the reflection was slower than me or slightly distorted. I took a few steps closer. The overhead light in the kitchen was bright enough to illuminate my shape, but the corridor behind me was dark, so the glass almost acted like a mirror. I leaned in and peered at my reflection. Then I saw another shape behind me. It was just a vague outline, like the silhouette of a person standing a foot or so back from me. My stomach sank. I froze. My hand tightened on the glass of water, and I felt cold sweat forming on my forehead. I couldn't move. Part of me wanted to spin around, but I was terrified I would see someone I didn't recognize. Or worse, someone who shouldn't be there at all. The shape in the reflection looked tall, maybe as tall as me, but with a slightly hunched posture, like it was leaning forward. My breath became shallow, and I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I stared at the glass for what felt like a full minute. Then the silhouette moved a little, as if shifting weight from one foot to the other. I felt my spine tingle. I whipped around with my arms up, nearly dropping my glass. But the kitchen was empty. The corridor was empty. There was no one there. My hands were shaking and my teeth were clenched so tight that my jaw ached. I tried to calm down. I told myself I was seeing things, maybe just a trick of the light or some reflection from outside. But I couldn't shake the sense of dread that filled me at that moment. I walked to my bedroom, locked the door behind me, and lay in bed for hours, eyes wide open, listening to every little creak and groan my apartment made. The following day, I forced myself to go about my regular routine. I woke up, took a shower, ate breakfast, and went to work. I didn't tell anyone about what I thought I saw. I even tried convincing myself it was just my imagination playing games with me because I was exhausted. Maybe my mind was drifting, and that's all it was. But deep down, I knew something didn't feel right. My thoughts kept drifting back to that reflection and how clearly I had seen a shape behind me. I remember the slight motion it made and how real it looked. The day dragged on. I tried to focus on my tasks, but I kept picturing that shape in the glass door. That night, I decided I would leave the kitchen light on and turn off the corridor light before going to bed. My plan was to avoid looking directly at the glass door. I figured if the kitchen stayed lit, then the glass wouldn't reflect the interior as strongly, or maybe it would be so bright that I wouldn't catch any weird shapes. It wasn't a perfect plan, but I was desperate to avoid the fear I had felt the night before. I stuck to my routine. I watched a bit of TV, scrolled on my phone, and tried not to think about the reflection. When I finally got up to grab a glass of water, I walked quickly. I kept my eyes on the sink the entire time, refusing to look at the door. I turned on the faucet, filled my glass, and drank. My body still felt tense, and I noticed my fingertips tingling. I heard no odd sounds, and I didn't see anything in my peripheral vision. Still, I rushed out of the kitchen, switched off the lights, and went to my bedroom. My heart was racing again, even though nothing happened. The next few nights went more or less the same. I tried to keep things bright in the kitchen so I wouldn't see the reflection so clearly. I also started skipping my late-night water runs, choosing to drink a bunch of water before bed so I wouldn't wake up thirsty. But sometimes I'd still get up around 2 a.m. because I felt the urge to drink something. On one of those nights, I forgot to leave the kitchen light on. The living room lamp was on instead, and that was enough to cast my reflection in the glass door once more. As I approached the sink, I heard a tiny squeak. It might have been the pipes or the fridge turning on, but my body reacted with a jolt of fear. My hands clenched and my shoulders tensed. I tried telling myself that I was just paranoid because of the previous incident. That's when I dared to glance at the door again. I could see my torso and part of my face. No one else was in the reflection. I exhaled a sigh of relief and turned on the faucet. I let the water flow, then looked back at the door. That's when I saw it again. The same silhouette standing just a few inches behind me, with its head tilted as though it was looking at my neck. My legs felt weak, and my throat went dry. I couldn't breathe. I turned around, and once again, there was nobody there. This time the sight was so vivid that my eyes started watering. I stood there panting for a few seconds. My entire body trembled and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I whispered some curses under my breath and stumbled to my bedroom. I locked the door, jumped into bed, and tossed and turned for the rest of the night, drenched in sweat. Over the next few days, I thought about sleeping on my couch, just to see if that helped me avoid the anxiety. But the couch is too close to the kitchen, and I felt like I'd be lying there, staring into that dark area. Sometimes I considered covering the glass door with a sheet or some foil, but I kept forgetting to buy anything to cover it properly. I have a small curtain there, but it's thin, and it doesn't block reflections at all. I found myself tiptoeing around my own apartment at night like I was afraid of making too much noise. I started hearing random clicks and pops from the walls and floors, and every time I jumped or flinched, I told myself, this is ridiculous. I'm letting my imagination get the best of me. One evening, I decided to face my fear head on. Around 10 o'clock, I went to the kitchen, turned off all the lights, and stood in front of the glass door with a small flashlight in my hand. I wanted to see if I could figure out any logical explanation for the silhouette. I pointed the flashlight at different angles to see if maybe a coat hanging somewhere or a shadow of a chair could create a weird outline. But everything looked ordinary. My reflection was faint in the darkness, but I didn't see any shape behind me. I stayed there for a few minutes, focusing on my breathing. I heard the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of a street lamp outside, and the rustle of leaves in the night breeze. No silhouette, no movement, just me in my apartment, trying to act brave. After a while, I turned the lights back on and felt a bit calmer. I made a snack, watched some late-night TV, and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night again feeling thirsty. I nearly convinced myself to go back to sleep without drinking water, but I couldn't. My throat felt parched, and I was getting a headache. I tried to push away the unease in my gut. I stepped out into the hallway, flicked on the kitchen light, and approached the sink. I kept my eyes down, avoiding the door. But halfway through filling my glass, I heard a slight scraping sound. It was brief, like a footstep on the tile right behind me. My pulse skyrocketed. I started sweating immediately. My knees felt weak. I forced myself to turn around slowly. Nothing. The corridor was empty, just like always. My heart thumped so hard that I felt it in my temples. I looked at the glass door anyway. My reflection was there, but no silhouette. I gulped down the water, nearly choking on it. Then I hurried back to my room and shut the door. I could barely sleep for the rest of the night. My mind raced, trying to figure out if there was some intruder hiding somewhere, or if I was losing it. But I never heard another sound. Days passed. I started closing the curtains earlier in the evening, but that thin fabric didn't help much. Whenever I walked by the door at night, I caught a glimpse of my own shape in the glass, and I felt that same old prickling on my skin, like I was being watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a flicker of movement behind me, but I never had the courage to stare for too long. I just moved on, poured my water, and left as quickly as I could. There was a time I considered inviting a friend over just so I wouldn't be alone at night, but I felt embarrassed. What would I say? "Hey, can you come over because I think I see a shadow in my reflection sometimes?" It sounded absurd. I'm not the kind of person who usually spooks easily. I don't watch horror movies much. I prefer comedic shows and stuff that relaxes me. But this was different. This felt personal. I started double-checking my door locks, testing the windows, making sure there weren't any gaps someone could crawl through. Everything looked secure. One afternoon, I walked outside to my little area behind the apartment. I usually keep a couple of plants there. I wanted to see if maybe something out there could be reflecting light in a strange way. I looked around. Just my 2 potted plants, a small grill I never use, and a broom in the corner. I walked up to the glass door from the outside, peered in. I saw the kitchen from that vantage point, the chairs, the table, the sink. Nothing strange, no bizarre angles, no weird smudges on the door that might cause illusions. It all looked normal. I felt a chill as I imagined how I must look from inside when I see that silhouette. The idea of something being behind me still gnawed at my mind. That night, I decided to keep all the lights on while I went about my usual routine. Every time I approached the kitchen, I felt a ball of tension in my stomach. I poured water, forcing myself to look straight ahead at the sink. My ears were on high alert, trying to catch any unusual noise. All I heard was my own breathing and the faint traffic outside. It was unnerving how quiet the apartment got. Once I finished drinking, I turned off the faucet and moved away fast. I could feel sweat on my palms. The next day, I left work early. I bought a heavier curtain for the door, one that was supposed to block outside light and reduce any reflection. When I got home, I installed it. The material was thick, and it covered almost the entire glass. I figured this might solve the problem once and for all. That night, I walked into the kitchen without feeling nervous. I poured my water, glanced at the curtain, and felt relieved. I couldn't see my reflection in the glass anymore. I felt like celebrating this small victory. I watched TV, relaxed a bit, and went to bed around midnight. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up again. My mouth was dry, and I felt a bit sweaty. I hesitated, but I had no choice. I needed a drink. I headed to the kitchen, turned on the light, and saw that the curtain was pulled slightly to one side. A few inches of glass were exposed. Maybe I hadn't secured it properly, or maybe I brushed it by accident earlier. My gut tightened. I walked over, took a breath, and reached for the curtain to pull it shut. Then I caught a glimpse of my face in the uncovered part of the glass. Behind my face, there was the silhouette again, that same hunched shape, leaning forward. My arms felt weak and my chest got tight. I almost dropped my glass. I forced myself to yank the curtain closed. My breathing was heavy and ragged. I stood there, staring at the curtain, not daring to open it again. After a few seconds, I stumbled back to my bedroom. My hands trembled so badly that I spilled water on the floor. I locked myself in, laid down in bed, and just stared at the ceiling, listening to my heart hammer in my chest. I felt a bit dizzy, and my shirt stuck to my skin from sweat. The rest of the night was a blur of anxious thoughts and restless tossing. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that shape behind me, almost touching my back. I haven't moved out of this apartment. I'm still here. I still have that same kitchen, that same door. Most nights I keep the heavy curtain drawn all the way. Sometimes I stack boxes in front of it so the curtain can't slide open by itself. I try not to think about it, but every once in a while I wake up thirsty and I have to go out there. My heart pounds, and the hair on my arms stands on end. I haven't seen the silhouette lately, but I feel it. It's like an unspoken presence behind that curtain. I don't tell anyone about it. Maybe I'll move out one day, or maybe I'll get used to living with this gnawing sense that someone, or something, is watching me from inside the glass. For now, I do what I can to ignore it and carry on. But every time I catch my reflection anywhere in this place, I brace myself for the possibility that I'm not alone. And deep down, I suspect that presence is still there, silently waiting. Last Thursday night, I was in the parking garage beneath the building where I work, and something happened that I still can't fully explain. I'm a practical guy, and I don't scare easily, but when I heard that voice echo through the concrete corridors, I felt a chill rush through my entire body. I want to tell you what happened step by step without dressing it up. I need to get this off my chest. I work in a tall office building downtown. The place has a sub-basement used for parking and for storing cleaning supplies, old boxes, and spare equipment. It's not exactly welcoming. The walls are gray, the ceiling is low, and the overhead fluorescent lights buzz whenever you turn them on. There's a constant smell of damp concrete and car exhaust. When you speak or move down there, your voice bounces off the walls like it's searching for a way out. That night, around 8 o'clock, I realized I forgot to double-check a circuit in the electrical panel. The building had been experiencing random flickers earlier that day, and my boss asked me to make sure the breakers were fine before I left. Normally, I would have done it right away, but I got caught up finishing reports. By the time I remembered, almost everyone else had gone home. I could have left it for the next morning, but I wanted to be thorough. So I took the elevator down to the garage level, then walked to the far set of stairs that led to the sub-basement. I had my car parked there too, so I figured I'd grab something from the trunk on my way back up. I stepped into the sub-basement, and the lights were already on. That struck me as odd because usually they're on timers or set to motion sensors that shut off after a while. Still, I didn't think much of it. I headed over to my car first, unlocked the driver's door, and reached in to grab my phone charger. I always keep a spare in the glove compartment. Then, just out of habit, I turned the engine over for a second to check my gas level. I was planning to refuel in the morning, and I wanted to make sure I had enough for the next day. After I switched off the ignition, I heard it. A faint voice like it was coming from behind one of the rows of parked cars. It said, "Hey, is anyone there?" in a low, distant tone. For a split second, I thought it was the echo of my own noise, but I hadn't spoken. I sat there in the driver's seat, engine off, the overhead light in the car shining on my hands. My heart skipped a beat, and I remember thinking, did I just imagine that? I got out of the car and shut the door. The sound of the car door echoed around me. I stood still, holding my breath for a moment, listening for any movement. The sub-basement was silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I was sure I'd heard someone call out, but I couldn't see anyone. The place is mostly open, with a few columns, some stacked boxes, and parked vehicles scattered around. If there was another person there, I should have been able to spot them pretty quickly. "Hello?" I called out. My voice bounced off the concrete walls. "Hello? Hello? Hello?" Then, after a pause, I heard something respond. It sounded like a distorted version of my own voice, but the words got jumbled. Maybe it was the echo, but it wasn't matching the exact timing of my own echo. It came from somewhere near the back, like behind the storage shelves, where extra paint cans and dusty boxes are kept. I felt a creeping sense of unease. My scalp tingled, and I gripped my phone charger in my hand as if it could defend me from whatever was out there. I forced myself to walk forward. I told myself I was just hearing the echoes in a weird way, and that the sub-basement's acoustics can sometimes play tricks on you. I'd experienced echoes down there before, but never like this. I stepped around a parked delivery van, trying not to let my footsteps click too loudly on the concrete. Each time my shoe made contact with the floor, the echo went in several directions, creating that faint, hollow sound that lingered too long. As I approached the far corner, I noticed a flicker in one of the lights overhead. It flashed for a second, leaving that after-image in my vision. Then I heard the voice again. It came out of the shadows, repeating something close to what I'd just said earlier, but out of order. It sounded like it was trying to mimic me, but got stuck halfway. I heard, "Hello, any, is there?" The words were scrambled, as if someone had recorded me and hit the wrong playback speed. My hands started sweating. I felt my shirt clinging to my back and my pulse picked up. I looked around, trying to see if maybe there was a speaker or some old equipment that could be causing these sounds. The sub-basement has old pipes and an outdated intercom system that nobody uses anymore. For a moment I wondered if the system had gotten stuck or malfunctioned, but I couldn't see any speaker that would create a sound that clear. I walked up to the chain-link fence that separates the parked cars from the maintenance supply area. Beyond the fence, there's a small corridor leading to the locked storage room. I didn't see any movement. Everything was still. I listened carefully, holding my breath. All I heard was the buzz of electricity. Then I spoke again. "Is somebody here? Hello?" The echo came back. "Somebody here. Hello?" But after a second, I heard an extra voice layered on top. Faint but definitely there, almost stumbling over the same words. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. The place smelled damp and stale, and my nostrils flared as I tried to stay calm. My throat went dry. I told myself it had to be an echo, but I'd never heard an echo that repeated the same phrase more than once. I took another step forward, and that's when I realized the voice was coming from multiple directions at the same time. It wasn't just bouncing in one corridor. It seemed like it was popping up in 3 or 4 places. It was faint, but I could sense it circling around me. I felt a sudden wave of claustrophobia, like I couldn't get enough air. My mind raced. There had to be a logical explanation, maybe pipes in the walls, or some kind of weird resonance. I stood there scanning the area. Nothing moved. All the cars were still and there was no one else in sight. I decided I'd had enough. I still needed to check the electrical panel, but my nerves were on edge. I hurried toward the back wall where the panel was located. It's a gray metal box with large switches and rows of breakers. I opened it, looked at the rows of numbers and labels, and tried to focus on the task. I flipped the switch I was supposed to check, verifying that the circuit wasn't tripped. Everything looked okay, so I shut it. My hand was trembling, though. I could hear my breathing echo in my ears. Then, without warning, I heard a loud thump. It sounded like something fell or got knocked over behind me. I spun around and stared into the rows of parked cars. The noise echoed, then died out. I squinted and saw a stack of folded chairs leaning against a shelf. One of them was rocking slightly, like it had just been bumped. I didn't see anyone around it, though. My heart pounded. I whispered, "What the hell?" And then the echo picked it up. Hell. Hell. But I also heard a warped version. Huh. Heel. It was slight, but it made the hair on my arms stand up. I couldn't handle it anymore. I slammed the electrical panel shut, possibly leaving some switches the way they shouldn't be. I figured I could fix it tomorrow. I needed to get out of there. I retraced my steps, moving faster now, practically jogging across the concrete floor. My shoes squeaked, and I heard squeaks echo back. At the same time, there were fragments of the voice calling out words I'd said earlier. "Someone there? Hello? What the hell?" It was like the place was recording me and spitting back random pieces of my own speech. As I passed my car, I considered jumping in and driving out, but I realized I'd have to open the heavy garage gate from inside the security booth. That booth is on the upper level, next to the building entrance. I didn't want to risk fumbling with the controls if that strange voice was still following me, so I decided to use the stairs to get up to the main lobby. Once I reached the bottom of the stairwell, I looked back one last time. The sub-basement stretched out in front of me like some big concrete maze. The fluorescent lights flickered. I thought I saw a shape moving between cars, but it was probably just my own reflection bouncing off a window. I took the stairs 2 at a time. My heart was racing and my chest felt tight. I remember the clang of my footsteps on the metal steps and the echo that chased me up. Every time I landed on a step, it felt like the entire stairwell vibrated. When I was about halfway, I heard a final echo. Some there? The words were all scrambled, but they sounded weirdly close, like they were right at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't look back again. I didn't want to see anything else. I reached the door to the main floor hallway, swung it open, and stumbled into the fluorescent glow of the corridor. The door hissed shut behind me. I stood there, catching my breath, feeling sweat trickle down my neck. I tried to compose myself, but my hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble pulling the door fully closed. I left it propped open for a second, then forced myself to shut it tight. I realized I hadn't turned off the lights in the sub-basement. I also wasn't sure if I'd left the electrical panel in the right configuration, but I had zero intention of going back. My body was on alert, and my instincts screamed at me to get out of the building. I hurried across the empty lobby, past the silent reception desk. There were only a few security cameras mounted on the ceiling, and I felt like they were watching me run around like a scared fool. I kept imagining the voice drifting up through the vents. I got outside into the cool night air and stood there for a moment. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself. The city lights flickered, and the streets were mostly empty at that hour. The parking attendant's booth on the surface level was empty too, because the night shift usually sits inside the main security office. I thought about going in there to report what happened, but I knew I wouldn't be able to explain it in a way that sounded normal. Hey, I heard an echo messing up my words down there. Wasn't going to earn me anything but weird looks. So I decided to call it a night. I walked to a nearby bus stop and caught the next bus home. The entire ride I kept rubbing my arms, feeling the goosebumps that wouldn't go away. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the sub-basement, the hum of the lights, the shadowy rows of cars, and that mangled echo of my own voice repeating bits and pieces of what I said. My pulse would start racing again, and I'd toss and turn for hours. Eventually, I gave up on rest and just stared at the ceiling, waiting for morning. When I finally came back to work the next day, everything felt off. I took the elevator straight to my office, avoiding the garage and the sub-basement. I didn't even want to park down there. I ended up leaving my car overnight, which was unusual for me, but I just couldn't bring myself to face that empty, echoing space. At around 10 in the morning, my boss asked me to finalize the check on the electrical panel. I told him everything was fine and that I'd verified it. I lied through my teeth. I wasn't ready to tell him I left it untouched after hearing whatever I heard. If there was a real problem with the breakers, I figured someone else would report an outage. No one did, so I guess I got lucky. For the rest of that day, I kept waiting for someone to mention a strange noise in the sub-basement or flickering lights or something. But nobody said anything. Business went on as usual. By the time lunch rolled around, I started to question whether I had overreacted. Maybe stress and fatigue made me jump at an echo. But deep down, I know what I heard. I know it wasn't a normal echo. Whatever was repeating my words wasn't doing it right. It sounded like something trying to speak but not quite understanding what the words meant. It's been almost a week now, and I still won't go down to that sub-basement alone. If I need to check anything down there, I make sure at least one of the maintenance guys comes with me. I haven't said why, and they don't ask. They probably think I'm just being cautious. But the truth is, I don't want to hear that voice again. I can't handle that feeling of being surrounded by echoes that don't match up. It felt like the sub-basement was alive, and it was using my own words against me. That's the story. There's no big revelation or dramatic conclusion. I didn't see a ghost, and I didn't find any hidden speaker. I just heard something that shouldn't have been there, something that twisted my voice and fed it back to me from all directions. It rattled me so badly that I ran out and left everything on. I still haven't fixed whatever might be wrong with that panel. If the building didn't burn down yet, maybe there was nothing to fix after all. But I know what I heard, and I'm sure I'll never forget that scrambled echo calling out pieces of my own words. It's in my head now. Every time I walk by the doorway to the stairs, I feel a tingle in my spine. I think about that stillness, and that broken repetition. And I remember how it felt when I realized I was alone, but not really alone, in a dark place that shouldn't have had any voice at all. I just hope I never have to hear that sound again. I got home from work one Friday, drenched in sweat and ready to collapse on my couch. I had no idea that a 5-minute elevator ride would leave me shaky for weeks. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghosts or anything like that. But after what happened in my building's elevator, I can't deny that something weird went on. It started out like any other Friday. I arrived around 6 in the evening, parked my car in the underground garage, and walked toward the lobby with my bag slung over my shoulder. By the time I pressed the call button, I was only thinking about a hot shower and maybe some takeout. I wasn't prepared for the most unsettling elevator ride of my life. When I got into the lobby, the lights were still on, and there was a faint buzz from the overhead fixtures. The doorman wasn't around, because he usually goes off duty around 5. That's normal on Fridays. He leaves the front desk empty unless there's a package or something. The lobby felt quiet, but it always does at that time. People usually come home around 7 or 8, so I assumed most folks were still at work or stuck in traffic. I hit the elevator button and waited. My legs were sore from standing at my job all day, so I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a second. The elevator dinged, and I heard the doors slide open. Inside, the light was bright, and there was a faint smell of cleaning fluid. They must have mopped earlier because the floor panels looked a bit shiny. I entered, pressed the button for the 9th floor, and rested my back against the wall. I noticed the usual overhead panel, floors 1 through 15, the emergency phone, and the small digital display that shows what floor the elevator is on. It showed 1, then flicked to 2 as the doors closed. Everything seemed normal. I felt the elevator lurch upward. I stared at my reflection in the stainless steel walls. I looked tired. My shirt had a couple of sweat stains, and I realized I'd forgotten to grab a bottle of water on the way out of work. I tried to distract myself by counting the floors as we passed them. 3, 4, 5. The movement was steady. I was thinking about dinner, pizza, or maybe a sandwich. My mind was already drifting toward the weekend. That's when the elevator slowed down around the 7th floor. It wasn't supposed to stop there because I hadn't pressed that button. The sudden halt made my stomach jolt. The doors slid open onto a dark corridor. Normally, the hallway lights on every floor stay lit until late at night. But here, on the 7th floor, it looked dim. Only one overhead light flickered. I thought maybe someone else had pressed the button, but I didn't see anyone waiting. I leaned forward a bit and peeked my head out. The corridor was empty, and it smelled stale, like the air wasn't circulating well. I didn't hear voices or footsteps. It was just silent. I pressed the closed door button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, a bit harder. Still nothing. I stepped back, trying to keep a lid on my irritation. I said, "Come on," under my breath. It wasn't really fear at first, just annoyance. Then a strange chill passed through the cabin. The temperature dropped in a matter of seconds. My skin tightened and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I heard a faint sound like someone stepping on the elevator's threshold. It reminded me of a shoe scraping against metal. My heart picked up speed. I looked at the doorway, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe a stranger. But the doorway was empty. The corridor was still dark. I stood there listening. My breath got shallow. I couldn't see anyone, but it felt like there was a presence right next to me. I pressed the closed door button repeatedly. My pulse thumped in my ears. The elevator doors finally started to slide shut, but it happened so slowly that I almost felt stuck in time. I kept my finger on that button, not wanting the doors to get stuck again. As they closed, I heard what sounded like soft footsteps inside the elevator, behind me. But I was alone. My hands felt clammy, and my mind raced. I turned around expecting to see somebody. There was no one there. The elevator door sealed shut, and I felt another lurch as the car resumed moving upward. The overhead display switched from 7 to 8. My heart was pounding. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the elevator's air conditioning made the sudden cold. Maybe I heard the building's pipes or some mechanical noise. But my gut told me something else was going on. When it reached the 9th floor, the doors opened normally. I rushed out. I didn't even wait for them to open fully. I squeezed through the gap and stepped onto my floor. The hallway there was well lit. The usual smell of old carpet and faint cleaning products was reassuring. My apartment door was just down the hall. Before I headed that way, I glanced back at the elevator. I saw the display above the doors. It flickered, then showed 7. The doors slid shut without me. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no reason for it to go back down to the 7th floor. No one had come aboard after me. No one else pressed any button. I stood there, confused and spooked. Finally, I walked to my door and fumbled with my keys. My hands were shaking and I struggled to fit the key into the lock. Inside my apartment, I dropped my bag on the floor and tossed my keys on the kitchen counter. I locked the door behind me, then leaned against it for a moment. My chest felt tight. I could still feel the cold in my bones. My shirt was damp with sweat. I turned on all the lights in the apartment. I went to the bathroom, splashed some water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked pale. My eyes were a bit bloodshot from the long day. I tried to tell myself I was just exhausted and letting my mind play tricks on me, but the memory of those footsteps wouldn't go away. I changed clothes, grabbed my phone, and sat on the couch. Part of me wanted to text a friend about what just happened, but I felt silly. How do you explain hearing invisible footsteps in an elevator? I didn't want to sound paranoid or ridiculous. I thought about calling the building manager to report a malfunction. But what would I say? That the elevator stopped on the 7th floor, the doors got stuck for a while, and I felt cold? That's not exactly a concrete complaint. I decided to order takeout to distract myself. While I waited for the delivery, I tried to watch TV. My mind kept wandering back to the elevator. Every time my thoughts returned to that moment, my heart rate kicked up again. The memory of that corridor, so dark and empty, made my skin crawl. I wondered if the lights were broken on that floor or if someone had turned them off. After dinner, I tried to sleep early. But as I lay in bed, my thoughts kept drifting to the silent corridor. I replayed the moment the doors refused to close. I remembered the sudden cold. I recalled the sound of footsteps. It was like a single step or two right behind me. I kept telling myself it must have been the air pressure or a mechanical noise, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. I finally fell asleep around midnight, but it wasn't restful. The next morning, I woke up feeling stiff. My neck was tense from tossing and turning. I had errands to run, including a grocery trip. I tried not to dwell on the elevator. When I left my apartment, I walked down to the 8th floor using the stairs. Then, out of habit, I headed to the elevator on the 8th floor. But before I pressed the button I remembered last night, I hesitated for a second. I shrugged it off, told myself it was just one weird incident. Then I pressed the button. The elevator arrived empty. I stepped in, pressed G for the garage level, and waited. My palms started to sweat. I watched the floors go down. 7, 6, 5. I tensed up as we passed the 7th floor, but this time it didn't stop. It kept going down to the ground floor. I exhaled when the doors opened. A small wave of relief washed over me. I started thinking that maybe it was just a glitch. But later that afternoon, when I got back with my groceries, I felt uneasy again. The elevator ride up was smooth. Nothing weird happened. Still, I walked faster than usual to my apartment once I reached the 9th floor, as if something might follow me. Over the next few days, everything seemed fine. I began to relax, telling myself that the elevator problem was a one-time fluke. But that following Friday, I got home around the same time as usual. The lobby was empty. The overhead lights hummed. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The same mechanical ding announced the arrival. I stepped in, pressed 9, and leaned against the wall. My stomach tightened when the elevator started moving. I kept my eyes on the display. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then it started slowing down again at 7. I felt my throat tighten. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open. The corridor was dark, just like before. One overhead light flickered weakly. My heart thudded against my rib cage. I pressed the close door button right away. At first, nothing happened. Then I felt that sudden coldness again. I smelled something like musty fabric. It was faint, but it made my nose scrunch. I heard what sounded like a rustling sound. My mind flashed back to those footsteps from the previous week. I looked around the cabin. It was just me. I felt a chill on my neck like a draft was moving inside the elevator. My arms prickled with goosebumps again. I pressed the button harder. The doors moved an inch, then stopped. The corridor outside was still empty, but the light flickered again and the entire space seemed darker. My breath came in short bursts. I felt sweat trickling down my back. Then, the doors began to close very slowly. I kept my finger on the button, not daring to let go. My heart pounded and I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. Right before the doors sealed shut, I heard a noise like a weak cough or a low whisper. It came from somewhere in front of me, near the doorway. I froze. The door finished closing and the elevator jerked, continuing its trip to the 9th floor. My legs felt numb, like I could barely stand. The overhead display changed from 7 to 8, then to 9. The doors opened and I practically jumped out onto my floor. I didn't turn around this time. I hurried to my apartment, unlocked the door, and closed it behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My hands trembled when I tried to lock the deadbolt. Eventually, it clicked into place. I dropped my stuff on the floor again and went straight to the bathroom to splash water on my face. My reflection was tense, my eyes wide. I felt the same tension as the week before, but this time, it was worse. There was no denying that the elevator was acting strange. The 7th floor corridor shouldn't be that dark. The elevator shouldn't be stopping there if no button was pressed. And I definitely shouldn't be hearing sounds like footsteps or whispers when I'm the only person in the elevator. That night, I hardly slept. I kept thinking about what might be causing this. Maybe the 7th floor had some electrical issue. Maybe the motion sensors were broken and it triggered the elevator to stop. That didn't explain the cold gusts of air or the sounds of someone stepping into the cabin. I didn't have a logical explanation, and that made it worse. The following week, I started taking the stairs more often. It's not pleasant to climb 9 floors, especially after a long workday, but I preferred the burning in my legs over the chill I felt on that elevator. Sometimes, if I saw another tenant waiting for the elevator, I'd hop on with them. I didn't want to ride it alone. When people asked me why I was using the stairs, I made excuses like, I'm trying to get more exercise, or it's part of my new routine. I didn't want anyone to think I was losing my mind. I still go home around 6 every night. The building is quiet at that time, which only makes it more unnerving. On the rare occasions I have to take the elevator by myself, I get anxious as soon as I step inside. My pulse quickens and I watch the floor numbers like a hawk. If it starts slowing down around 7, my chest tightens. I press the close door button rapidly, hoping to bypass that stop. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. When it does stop, the doors open onto that same dark corridor. The flickering light is still there, and every time I'm alone, I feel that same cold air. I haven't reported this to the building manager because I don't know what to say. There's no proof. Some neighbors have mentioned weird noises, but they brush it off as elevator maintenance issues. I haven't met anyone who's had the exact same experience. Maybe they just don't talk about it, or maybe it only happens when you're alone. Now, whenever I'm in the lobby around 6 in the evening, I think twice before pressing the elevator call button. Sometimes I'll linger, hoping someone else arrives to ride up with me. If nobody shows up, I try to build up the courage to press that button anyway, but my finger always hovers over it. I hesitate, remembering the cold air, the footsteps, and the flicker of that hallway light. The memory sends a jolt through my nerves. Sometimes I just head for the stairs. By the time I reach my apartment, I'm sweaty and out of breath, but at least my heart isn't pounding with the same fear I feel in that elevator. People ask me why I'm always taking the stairs now, and I give the same excuses. If they push the topic, I shrug and say, I like the exercise. I don't want them to see the fear in my eyes. I don't want them to think I'm crazy. But every night when I lie in bed, I remember the day the elevator opened on the 7th floor and wouldn't close. I remember that pressure in the air, as if someone, or something, stepped into the cabin with me. And I remember seeing the panel display 7 again when I finally got off at 9. I've never been superstitious, but I can't shake this feeling of dread. I can't explain it logically. I've tried to come up with rational reasons. Mechanical errors, power fluctuations, or even my imagination. But whenever I'm alone in that elevator and it nears the 7th floor, I feel my stomach tighten. I press the button to close the doors early, praying it won't stop. If it does, I brace myself, ready to hit that button again until the doors finally close. This has been my routine for weeks now. I don't see it changing anytime soon. I don't know what's really going on with that elevator, and I'm not sure I want to find out. All I know is that I avoid taking it when I'm by myself. If I have to face it alone, I get my finger on that button the moment I step inside, and I always keep my ears open for any sign of those footsteps. If I hear them again, I'll just keep pressing close door until I'm safe on my floor. That's the only plan I have for now. And that's why I stick to the stairs whenever I can. I noticed the first strange note on a Wednesday morning 2 weeks ago. It was on my corkboard in my home office. It said, "Don't forget." The handwriting was shaky and almost unreadable. I stood there staring at it for a few seconds, trying to recall if I had written it. I didn't think I had. I pulled it off the board and tossed it on my desk, thinking it might have been stuck there by accident. I didn't feel scared at first. I just felt confused. I double-checked my planner, my phone, and my email to see if I had missed some appointment. Everything looked normal. I brushed it off and went back to my usual work. I live alone in a small house on a quiet street. There's no roommate, no family member around, and I don't get many visitors. My home office is a small room next to my living room. It has a single window that faces the backyard, which is fenced. My desk is against the wall. Behind me is the corkboard where I usually pin up work tasks, reminders, and small notes for the week. I keep that door locked sometimes when I'm out, but I never worried about it at night because I'm the only person here. The next morning I saw another note. This time it said, "It's late." It was pinned near the top edge of the board, half covered by a receipt I'd pinned the day before. When I spotted it, my heart fluttered. I stood there, staring. The letters were jagged, slanted, and cramped together. It didn't look like my handwriting. I tried to think of a rational explanation. Maybe I'd written it unconsciously. Maybe I was half asleep and left myself a note. But I had no memory of it. I checked the receipt pinned next to it. No new holes, no obvious sign that anyone had messed with the board. I took a picture of the note with my phone and compared it to the "Don't forget" note I had thrown on my desk. The handwriting matched. It wasn't mine. That evening, I called my older brother. He lives in another state, so I asked if he was playing some kind of prank on me. He laughed and said he had better things to do, and he hadn't set foot in my house in months. After I ended the call, I felt uneasy. The note was still pinned there. I tried to brush it off again. I watched some TV, locked the office door for the night, and went to bed. I didn't sleep well. The following day, another note appeared. It said, "Check the time." Same handwriting, same angle, same messy letters. I swallowed hard. My chest felt tight. I tested the office door handle. It was still locked. I checked the window. Locked as well. I looked around the room for any sign of tampering, but nothing seemed out of place. My file cabinet was untouched, my drawers were closed, and my desk chair was in the same spot. No footprints or scuffs on the floor. I felt a chill run through my arms. I sat down, stared at my computer screen, and tried to focus on work. I'm a freelance web developer. I usually enjoy the freedom of working from home, but now the house felt different. It felt like someone was slipping inside without a trace. I couldn't concentrate. I kept glancing at the corkboard. The note was plain white, torn roughly from a larger sheet. I tugged at the edges. They were jagged. I couldn't figure out what kind of paper it was, but it looked like cheap notepad paper. I pulled open my desk drawers, rummaging through my own notepads. None of them matched. I took another picture, then crumpled the note and threw it in a small box on the floor along with the other two. That night I locked the door again. I pushed my desk chair against the doorknob. I stood there for a minute, listening to the quiet. The only sounds were the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and a low hiss from the air conditioner. The house didn't feel inviting. My ears picked up every small creak and pop. I went to bed and tried to calm myself, but my mind kept returning to the notes. I told myself I would set up some way to catch whoever was doing this, but I had no idea how. The next morning, I unlocked the door and felt my pulse pound. The chair was still wedged where I left it. The window was shut. Yet there was a new note. It said, "Where were you?" I felt a jolt in my gut. I spoke out loud, "Who's doing this?" But nobody answered. My voice sounded shaky. I checked the rest of the office. Nothing looked stolen or touched. The computer was off. The books on the shelf looked undisturbed. I rubbed my forehead and tried to think. I wasn't ready to call the police because there was no sign of forced entry, no real threat, just weird notes. But I felt uneasy. I had no logical explanation. I started searching online for hidden camera solutions. I found a small camera that I could place on a shelf or on top of a cabinet, and it would record all night. I ordered one with fast shipping. Until it arrived, I decided to push a heavy box against the window, and I added an extra interior lock to the office door. Later that day, I got a notification that my package would arrive in 2 days. I tried to keep myself busy with work and errands. I even did some grocery shopping just to get out of the house. When I came back, I went straight to the office. Nothing new. The note from that morning was still there. I pulled it off the board and dropped it in the box with the others. I locked the door again and left. I slept on the couch that night. My bedroom suddenly felt too far from the office. I wanted to hear if anyone tried to open the door. I woke up at sunrise. My back hurt from the couch. I walked over to the office door. The lock was still in place, the heavy box still jammed against the window. I opened the door slowly. Another note. "Look behind you." My hands shook as I grabbed it. The paper felt cold and rough against my fingertips. I turned around, scanning every corner of the office. Empty. My breath got shallow. I pulled out my phone to call the police. Then I stopped. What would I say? That someone was sneaking into my locked office to leave cryptic notes but not taking anything? They might not take it seriously, or they'd come over, find no signs of entry, and tell me to get a better lock. I put my phone down. I canceled my work commitments for the day. I spent the afternoon double-checking every possible way into that room. The window was secure, the door was solid, and the walls showed no secret panels or anything bizarre like that. The vents were too small for anyone to crawl through. I walked in circles around the desk, trying to piece it together. The tension made my shoulders ache. My hands felt sweaty. I kept wiping them on my jeans. That evening, the doorbell rang. My camera arrived. I paid the delivery guy, brought the box inside, and immediately set it up. The camera was small, black, and had night vision. I placed it on top of a bookshelf in the corner, so it had a clear view of the corkboard and the door. I tested it. The feed showed a wide angle of the room. I plugged in a small memory card and set it to record overnight. I forced myself to eat a microwave dinner. I tried to distract myself with a show on TV, but my eyes kept drifting to the dark hallway that led to the office. I felt my stomach twist every time a floorboard creaked. By midnight, I decided to check the office door one last time. Everything was locked. I double-checked the camera's status light. It glowed green. Satisfied, I left and tried to sleep in my bedroom for the first time in days. The next morning, I rushed into the office. Right away, I saw it. Another note, pinned neatly in the center of the board. "You won't see me." I felt a wave of panic roll through my chest. I yanked the note off the board. My throat felt dry. I muttered a curse under my breath and went straight for the camera. I pulled the memory card out, plugged it into my computer, and opened the video file. I felt my heart pounding as I watched. The video showed me walking in last night, adjusting the camera, then leaving and turning off the lights. The room stayed dark and empty for hours. The timestamp crept forward. Nothing happened on screen, no movement, no figure. The door didn't open, yet the note had appeared on the board. I scrubbed through the footage frame by frame. It was the same, an empty room. Sometime around 3 a.m., there was a flicker in the recording. The entire screen went black for a few seconds, then came back. When it came back, the note was on the board. I stared at the monitor, feeling my jaw tighten. I replayed that part over and over. It didn't show anyone entering. It was just a blank gap in the recording, and then the note appeared. I leaned back in my chair. My arms felt weak. A tingling sensation crawled up my spine. My eyes darted around the office, searching for anything that could explain this. I felt sweat on my forehead. The camera didn't catch a person at all. The feed cut out for just a few seconds. I checked the equipment. The battery was full. The memory card had plenty of space. There was no reason for it to stop recording, but it did. I felt anger mixed with fear. I tossed the memory card onto the desk. I stood up, walked in circles for a while, then went to the kitchen to splash water on my face. For the next few days, I tried different angles with the camera. I tried hooking it up to my laptop, hoping I could catch a live feed, but the same thing kept happening. A brief blackout in the footage, then a new note pinned to the board. Every time I opened the door in the morning, that sinking feeling returned. My heart pounded so hard that I sometimes felt lightheaded. Each note had a short message like "time is running" or "don't turn around." They all looked like they were scrawled by the same shaky hand. I saved them in a shoebox. I kept telling myself there had to be a trick or a rational cause. I thought about the possibility of sleepwalking, but I never found evidence of that. I checked my phone's motion tracker apps and tried to see if I was leaving my bed at night. I found no sign of movement. On the 5th day after I started recording, I woke up with a headache. I felt exhausted. My mind was spinning. The moment I opened the office door, I saw the new note. "It's almost over." My stomach lurched. I grabbed the note and held it up to the light. My hands were shaking so badly that the paper made a soft rattling sound. I was angry, but I also felt cornered. I set it on the desk, started up the camera footage, and saw the same gap in the middle of the night. The same abrupt cut, then the note appearing out of nowhere. I texted my brother about it. I sent him a screenshot of the gap in the video, but he only replied with jokes. He thought I was messing with him. I called a friend who used to work in security. He suggested I get a more advanced system with multiple cameras, maybe motion sensors. I ordered extra cameras online. While waiting for them, I tried to stay calm, but every night felt like a countdown. When the extra cameras arrived, I put one in the hallway, one in the living room facing the office door, and another in the backyard, near the office window. I stayed awake until after midnight, listening for any sound of intrusion. I finally dozed off around 2 a.m. In the morning, I checked all 3 cameras, plus the original one in the office. Each feed had the same strange gap around the same time, just a few seconds of black screen. Right after that, the office camera showed the new note. I stood at my desk, looking at all the notes spread out in front of me. "Don't forget. It's late. Where were you? You won't see me. Time is running. It's almost over." The handwriting was erratic, the letters cramped. My mouth felt dry, my hands were cold. I wiped a layer of sweat off my forehead. I felt like the walls were closing in. I stared at the locked door, the locked window, and the cameras. They were all useless against whatever was happening. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I haven't found any real evidence of an intruder. The locks remain intact. There are no footprints, no forced entry, no suspicious neighbors. The cameras only show those blackouts. Every time I see a new note, a lump forms in my throat. I can't stop scanning every inch of that office, expecting to find something that explains it. So far, I've found nothing. I'm still here, still working. I do my job, I eat, I shower, and I pretend life is normal, but I'm on edge. I jump at small noises. I check the door several times a night. I pace around the house and peer out the windows, looking for anything unusual. My nerves are shot. My back aches from the tension. Even as I write this, I catch myself glancing at the corkboard, half expecting a new note to appear right in front of my eyes. I don't know who or what is leaving these messages. I don't know how they're getting in or if they're getting in at all. Some days I wonder if my mind is playing tricks on me. But the notes are real. I can touch them. I can read them. I can compare the handwriting. And no matter what I do, they keep showing up. That's my story so far. I wish I had an explanation. I wish I could say I discovered a hidden entry point or a strange device left behind by some prankster. But I haven't found anything. All I have are these disturbing messages that appear in a locked room without any sign of intrusion. It happens almost every day, and each time my body reacts with a chill. My stomach tightens, my pulse races, and my mind scrambles for answers. So far, I have none. I'm stuck with these slips of paper that remind me something is going on, and I have no idea how to stop it. That's where I'm at, and I can't see an end to it. I want to start by saying I'm not someone who gets spooked easily. I grew up in a noisy house, and I learned to shrug off random creaks and bumps in the night. But something about this situation is different. I live in a penthouse apartment, which is already the highest level in my building. But there's a small attic space above one corner of my ceiling, and it belongs to my neighbor next door. Our units share part of the building structure, so even though I'm on the top floor, he has a cramped storage area right above my bedroom and part of my living room. It's not large enough for a person to stand up in comfortably, but it's big enough to store boxes or a couple of old suitcases. He told me he rarely, if ever, goes up there. He claims he's never needed anything from those boxes and that they're just full of junk. The first time I heard the noises was on a rainy Tuesday night. I remember because I was watching the local news and the forecast warned about heavy storms. I had just settled in. My windows were rattling a bit from the wind, and I had a feeling it was going to be a tough night to sleep. Around midnight, I switched off the TV and tried to relax in bed. A few minutes later, I heard a faint scratching sound. At first, I assumed it was a branch scraping against a window or maybe some debris hitting the side of the building, but the sound seemed to come from above me, not from outside. It was soft at first, like something brushing against the floor of the attic. Then it stopped. I waited. Everything was quiet except for the rain. About an hour later, I heard a clearer noise. It was a dull thump, like something heavier dropping onto the attic floor. My heart sped up, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself maybe it was just something shifting in one of those boxes. People store random stuff, and sometimes items move around if they weren't stacked properly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just boxes settling. I listened for a while, but eventually I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I tried to laugh it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, a nagging feeling stuck with me throughout the day. A week went by without any other strange sounds. But on the next rainy night, again the forecast called for a storm, I heard scraping again. It started around the same time, just past midnight. This time it was more frequent. The sound reminded me of nails or something hard dragging across the attic floor. I also heard what I can only describe as faint footsteps. They were slow but steady, as if someone was walking in circles in that cramped space. I felt my palms sweat. I sat up in bed, straining to hear every detail. My heart was pounding hard and my breathing felt shallow. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I should try to knock on it. I decided that was a bad idea. The next day, I waited until early evening and then knocked on my neighbor's door. He's a quiet guy, probably in his late 50s. I told him about the noises. He seemed surprised, said he'd never been up there at night and insisted that he only had old boxes of books and some other random stuff. He assured me he stored nothing heavy or alive. He apologized if anything shifted and said it might be the wind moving loose items. He added that he never climbs up there because it's musty and has poor ventilation. He ended by saying that if the noises persisted, I could contact the building manager to check it out. I thanked him and went home. That night I tried to relax. I convinced myself that the neighbor was telling the truth, that maybe moisture or wind was causing some stuff to move around. The building is a few decades old, and older structures tend to have their quirks. But a few nights later, the noises returned and they were louder. I was sure I heard rhythmic steps, like someone pacing back and forth. There was also scratching, but it wasn't constant. It would start, then pause, and then I'd hear the steps again. I grabbed my phone and texted the building manager. He lives on the second floor, so it didn't take him long to come up. I heard the elevator ding, and I opened my door before he had the chance to knock. He's a middle-aged guy named Rick, friendly enough, and he knows his job well. I explained everything, keeping my voice low. I didn't want my neighbor to overhear and think I was accusing him of something. Rick said we should go up together to check the attic, but we realized we'd need the neighbor's permission. I walked next door and knocked. My neighbor looked surprised, but allowed Rick and me to climb up the small access ladder in his hall closet. He stayed behind in his living room, looking a bit uneasy. Once Rick and I were up there, I immediately noticed the stale air. The space was cramped, and the single light bulb was weak. There were a few old cardboard boxes stacked against one wall. I saw some old suitcases in the far corner. The floor creaked under our weight. Dust rose up around us, and I had to fight the urge to cough. Rick used his phone's flashlight to check the corners. We saw mold patches and some spider webs, but nothing else. The boxes looked untouched. The suitcases were covered in dust. It didn't look like anyone had been rummaging around recently. We checked every corner as best we could, though there wasn't much room to move. Rick took a closer look at the floorboards. Everything seemed normal, except for the obvious signs of age. Then he shrugged and said there wasn't much we could do. He suggested that maybe water was getting in through a tiny crack in the roof, causing sounds as the wood expanded and contracted. He said if the noises persisted, we could schedule a more thorough inspection. But for now, there was nothing unusual. We climbed back down, and my neighbor looked relieved. He said he didn't mind if I asked Rick to check again sometime, but he really believed it was just old junk and weather issues. I tried to feel reassured, but that night I couldn't shake a sense of unease. I tried to sleep, but around the same time, past midnight, there it was again. The scraping was louder than ever, and the footsteps sounded more deliberate. It felt like someone was stomping above my head. I turned on the lights in my bedroom because my hands were shaking. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling my chest tighten. There was something in that attic, and it wanted me to know it was there. It got worse over the next few nights. The sounds weren't constant, but when they came, they lasted longer, and they were more forceful. I started losing sleep. I'd lie awake, my mind racing. I tried music or podcasts to distract myself, but every time I heard a thump or scrape, I'd rip my headphones out and freeze. My stomach was in knots, and I was irritated during the day. I even considered staying somewhere else for a while, but I didn't want to abandon my home. It felt wrong to just walk away. One evening, I saw my neighbor in the hallway. I mentioned the noises again. He listened politely, but he started to look defensive, like he was tired of hearing about it. He told me he had no reason to go up there. He promised again that he wasn't doing anything. I believed him. I didn't think he was sneaking up there just to mess with me. That wouldn't make sense. Plus, he never seemed like that kind of person. I think he sensed my frustration because he suggested that if I really wanted, I could borrow his key to the attic access. He said if I felt it was important, I could go up there on my own. He didn't mind as long as I was careful. I nodded, but I didn't accept the key right then. Something about going up there alone felt wrong. I don't consider myself superstitious, but the thought of being in that cramped space made my skin crawl. The nights that followed were some of the worst I've experienced. I'd lie in bed, half expecting a ceiling panel to crack open. The noises came sporadically. Sometimes it was the scraping, sometimes it was distinct footstep sounds. Occasionally I thought I heard low, heavy breathing, but I couldn't be sure. It might have been the wind. When it rained, the noises seemed to pick up intensity. My legs would feel tense and my neck would stiffen. My heart would race. Sometimes I'd get up and walk around my apartment, turning on every light. I'd check my front door as if something might try to come down from above and exit into the hallway. One night, around 2 a.m., I worked up the courage to knock on the ceiling. I stood on a stool in my living room, reached up and tapped 3 times. The scraping stopped for a moment. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear my pulse. Then a single thump came from above. It was slow and heavy. I froze. I expected more, but nothing else happened. After a few minutes of standing there with my arm trembling, I got down from the stool and just stared at that spot. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I took a half day off work because I couldn't focus. I caught Rick by the elevator in the late afternoon and told him the noises were getting worse. He said he'd try to schedule a more thorough inspection with a contractor, but he also warned me that if they didn't find anything, there wasn't much the building could do. I felt a wave of frustration, but I kept it together. Back in my apartment, I paced the living room, thinking about the neighbor's offer to let me into the attic. I looked up at the ceiling. I was sweating just standing there. I considered the possibility that an animal could have gotten in. But if it was an animal, it was big. It sounded heavier than a raccoon or a cat. Another part of me wondered if there could be someone squatting up there. But it's such a small space, and Rick and I had been up there. We would have seen signs of that. As evening turned into night, I found myself dreading bedtime. I settled on my couch with the TV on low volume, hoping maybe I'd drift off if I felt less alone in the dark. Around midnight, the lights flickered from the storm outside. The rain battered the windows. Then I heard the footsteps again. They started above my living room this time. I felt a tightness in my throat. The steps moved across the ceiling, then stopped directly above me. I could feel sweat on my forehead. My hands felt clammy. I turned the TV off, hoping to hear better. That's when the scraping sound started. It was harsh and repetitive, like someone dragging something heavy across rough wood. I jumped to my feet, grabbed my phone, and stepped into my bedroom. The sound followed. A loud thump echoed through the ceiling. I wanted to scream at it to stop. After a few minutes, it got quiet. I stood there breathing heavily, trying to calm down. My thoughts raced. I wanted to call Rick again, but it was the middle of the night. I considered texting him anyway, but I wasn't sure what he could do. I also thought about the neighbor's offer. Maybe I needed to see for myself. The idea made my stomach churn. But what else could I do? For the next few days, I tried to carry on with my routine. I worked, I bought groceries, I tried to keep busy. But every time I came home, I felt uneasy. My nights were filled with those sounds. They weren't every minute, but they were consistent enough to keep me on edge. I realized I was jumping at small noises, even during the day. My fuse got shorter. I found myself snapping at coworkers for minor things. I had dark circles under my eyes. I kept telling myself I should just go up there and see what was going on, but I kept avoiding it. My gut told me it wouldn't help. Finally, one rainy evening, I decided to take action. I left my apartment and knocked on my neighbor's door. I told him I wanted to inspect the attic by myself. He looked concerned, but he handed me the key to his closet. I thanked him and walked back to my place to gather a flashlight and a dust mask. My heart was racing. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grip the flashlight. I stood outside his closet for a while, staring at the small door in the ceiling that led up to the attic. The building's walls felt damp from the humidity. I could hear the storm pounding on the roof. My neighbor had retreated to his living room, giving me space. I reached up and pulled the ladder down. The smell of mold and stale air hit me. I climbed a few steps and shone the flashlight around. The dust particles floated in the beam of light. My stomach was doing flips. That's when I heard a low scraping sound right above me. I froze on the ladder, halfway up. The sound moved across the attic, toward the corner that sits above my living room. My legs felt weak and my grip on the ladder tightened. I swallowed hard. I wanted to keep going, but I couldn't force myself to move. My chest was pounding. The scraping got louder. The beam of my flashlight shook as my hands trembled. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my temple. I pictured all the boxes and suitcases up there, but I also thought about how cramped it was. If something rushed at me, I'd have nowhere to go. I stood there for what felt like forever. The scraping finally stopped, but I could still hear something like soft movement on the far side of the attic. It sounded heavier than a rat. My gut told me not to go up. I felt an overwhelming sense that I shouldn't push it. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there. I backed down the ladder, breathing in quick bursts. I folded the ladder up, locked the closet, and I walked straight out of my neighbor's apartment. He stood up when he saw me. I shook my head and handed the key back without saying much. Now I'm back in my apartment. I can still hear occasional thumps. They're not as frequent tonight, but each one sends a jolt of tension through my body. I don't have a clear answer. Rick promised he would schedule a professional inspection soon, but that hasn't happened yet. I keep telling myself that it could be an animal or something natural, but part of me wonders if I should just move out. I don't know what else to do. I'm writing this with the lights on. My hands are still shaking. The rain outside is making my windows vibrate. Every time the thunder rolls, I brace myself, waiting to hear that scraping or the footsteps overhead. I don't know what's up there. I don't know if it's something I even want to discover. All I know is that it doesn't feel right. And until someone finds a real explanation, I'm stuck here in my own apartment, listening to those noises that don't make sense. I've thought about going to a hotel, but that feels like running away. I've thought about demanding the building open the attic space and tear everything out, but that's not practical. The neighbor wouldn't go for that, and the manager would probably say no. So I'm just waiting, hoping the sounds will stop on their own. But a deep part of me feels that the more we poke around, the more intense it gets. Like something doesn't want us there. That's why I'm still here, awake, typing all this. I'm trying to ignore the occasional shuffling sounds above me. If I don't pay attention, maybe it'll stay quiet. But I can feel the tension in my shoulders. My head is pounding. It's after midnight now, and the storm's not letting up. I'm not sure what tomorrow will bring or the next time it rains. All I can do is wait and try not to listen too closely. Maybe that's the only way I'll get some sleep. I first felt that cold hand on a Tuesday morning while I was halfway up a steep trail near High Point Peak. The weather was decent. The sun was out, but the air was cool. I had paused to check my footing, and something pressed against my shoulder. It felt like a human hand, but there was no one around. I jerked forward, almost losing my balance. I turned around and saw only rocks, shrubs, and a few scattered pine trees. No rustling, no footprints, nothing. That moment stayed with me. I kept climbing but felt uneasy. My palms were damp and my heart pounded every time I took a step. I kept looking behind me, waiting to see a person or at least hear some movement, but I was alone. When I reached the top, I tried to enjoy the view. I looked at the valley, saw birds gliding, noticed the shape of the distant river. My mind kept replaying that weird moment. By the time I got home, I couldn't shake that strange touch from my thoughts. My shoulders still felt cold hours after the climb. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I thought I was just tired and maybe a little jumpy. The next day, I went back to the same spot because I wanted to confirm that there was nothing strange going on. The hike started normally. I parked my car by the dirt lot near the trailhead. I packed water and a protein bar. I made sure my boots were secure. I took a deep breath and moved along the path. I heard a few birds in the distance and noticed some squirrels darting into bushes. The sky was clear. The breeze felt nice on my face. As I climbed, I kept checking behind me. I did it every few minutes. I wasn't sure why. I think I expected something to be there. I felt on edge. My stomach tightened each time I turned around, but I saw nothing except the trail and scattered rocks. I reached the section where the path narrows. There's a steep drop-off on the right side. I moved carefully, placing my feet to maintain balance. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. My arms tensed, and my breathing went shallow. I stopped and scanned the area. Still no one. I pushed forward and reached the same ledge where I had felt the hand the day before. I paused, gripping a small ledge with my left hand. My right foot was on a piece of rock that jutted out. As I paused, I heard a faint scrape. My head whipped around, but the trail behind me was empty. No birds fluttered, no small rocks fell. I only heard my own breathing. Then I felt a tingle move up my arms like a sudden rush of cold. I glanced over my shoulder. There was nothing. I was shaking, but I forced myself to keep climbing. By the time I got to the top, sweat covered my face. I sat down on a flat rock, gulped water, and tried to calm down. My pulse was high, and my body felt tense. I waited a few minutes, looking at the horizon, trying to ground myself. I eventually headed home, confused and tired. All day I felt watched, even in my own apartment. A few days later, I returned to the mountain. It was late afternoon. The sky had a dull gray color and the air felt heavy. I walked up the main trail again. About 20 minutes in, I noticed movement off to my left. It was a shape in the distance, half hidden behind some trees. I stopped and stared. I saw a figure. It looked like a man dressed in dark clothing, but there was a thin layer of fog around him. I couldn't see his face. My chest tightened. My fingers felt numb. I looked down for a second, trying to steady my breathing. When I looked up, that figure was gone. I searched the tree line but found nothing. I considered walking back to the car, but curiosity pulled me forward. I kept walking, feeling sweat in my palms, my heart drumming in my chest. About 10 minutes later, I saw that shape again near a boulder that sat beside the trail. I froze and stared. The man looked like he was crouching, but there was a faint swirl of mist around him. Before I could say anything, that shape faded from view. It vanished without a sound. I climbed for another hour, taking slow steps, scanning the area. My skin prickled at every gust of wind. My neck felt stiff from turning around so often. I was trying to catch any sign of that figure again, but I made it to a rocky outcrop without another sighting. By then, the sun was low in the sky. I decided it was best to head down before nightfall. While I descended, I heard a short hiss, like someone exhaling through clenched teeth. I looked around and saw no one. My legs trembled and I hurried down. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there for a minute, trying to calm my breathing. My hands shook and my mouth felt dry. Over the next few days, I experienced strange dreams. I woke up feeling like I had walked all night. My shoulders and legs felt sore. I remembered bits of rocky trails and swirling fog. In the dreams, there was a man ahead of me, always just out of reach. I would call out, but he never turned around. I decided to take a break from climbing. I stayed home. I watched TV and did some bodyweight exercises indoors. But the urge to go back to the mountains grew stronger. I wanted to figure out what was happening. I couldn't ignore it. I also felt drawn to the summit. Something about that place kept pulling me back. I waited until the next weekend before going again. This time I prepared more carefully. I brought a small flashlight, a thermal jacket, and some energy gels. The forecast mentioned a chance of rain, but I decided to go anyway. I reached the trailhead around midday. The sky was overcast. The air felt damp. I walked up the trail at a steady pace, focusing on my breathing. After about half an hour, I started to feel that sensation of being watched again. My arms felt a light chill, and my senses were on high alert. I didn't hear any voices, but I felt something close by. I scanned the tree line on both sides, but I saw only trunks and branches. I continued up to a spot where a narrow path branched off to the left. I had never taken that path before. My heart was pounding. My gut told me to stick to the main route, but my curiosity was strong. I decided to check that side path. The ground there was muddy from recent rain. My boots sank a bit with each step. The air smelled damp and water dripped from leaves. After a few minutes, the path opened to a small clearing. I stopped. There were no footprints, but the ground looked disturbed. Twigs were broken, and there was a shallow groove in the dirt. My stomach tensed. I felt a wave of nervous energy. I crouched down to inspect the groove, thinking maybe an animal had been there. Then I heard a soft crunch behind me. I spun around, but I saw only shifting fog. My breathing sped up, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I stepped back toward the main trail, but as I moved, I saw that figure again. He was off to the side, partially obscured by the fog. He looked like a man wearing some kind of jacket or coat, but I couldn't make out details of his face. My heart pounded. My tongue felt heavy, and my hands shook. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" No response. The figure flickered in the fog, and then it was gone. My knees felt weak. I stood there, trying to control my breathing. The air seemed colder. My face felt damp from sweat. My throat was dry. I turned around and walked back to the main trail. I kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't see him again in that spot. I returned to the main path and continued upward. I passed that narrow ledge where I had felt the cold hand. I felt goosebumps on my arms as I walked by. I climbed up through a series of switchbacks. My legs ached, and I was tired, but I didn't want to stop. I wanted to reach the top before the weather got worse. The wind picked up as I got higher. The clouds seemed heavier, and a light drizzle started. The trail became slick. I slowed down, planting my feet carefully. My breaths were shallow, but I forced myself to keep a rhythm. Step, breathe, step, breathe. When I reached a plateau near the summit, the drizzle turned into a steady rain. My jacket kept me mostly dry, but the wind cut through me. My ears were cold. My boots were soaked. I could see a thin veil of fog rolling in. It moved across the rocks in front of me. I looked around for shelter. There was a small rock overhang, so I walked over and crouched beneath it. The rocky surface provided some cover, but I still felt the damp air on my face. I sat there for a few minutes, taking sips of water and chewing on an energy bar. My mouth felt stale, and my jaw was tight. I massaged my shoulders, trying to relax. Suddenly, I heard a soft scrape behind me, near the back of the rock overhang. I turned my head and saw a flicker of movement. My heart slammed in my chest. I felt my pulse in my neck. I pointed my flashlight toward the darkness under the overhang. The beam cut through the shadows. My hands were unsteady, causing the light to bounce. At first, I saw only stone and a bit of damp dirt. Then I spotted something that looked like a sleeve or a piece of fabric. I inched closer, my body tense. My fingertips felt cold and my jaw was clenched. I didn't smell anything unusual, just damp rock and my own sweat. I called out, "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed. No answer. I stayed there, aiming the flashlight. My breathing was loud in my ears. I waited maybe 15 seconds. Then I noticed a faint silhouette at the back of the space. It looked like the same man I had seen before. His outline seemed hazy, like he was shrouded in mist, even though we were in a confined area. My head felt light, and my stomach churned. I tried to speak again, but my throat closed up. He didn't move closer. He just stood there. I heard drops of water falling from the rock above me. I heard my own breathing. My teeth were on edge. I slowly backed away, still pointing the flashlight. My shoulders trembled and I kept swallowing, trying to find my voice. When I was a few steps out of the overhang, I turned and ran up the trail toward the summit. The rain made the ground slick, but I forced myself to keep going. My heart pounded. My legs felt heavy, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I didn't stop until I reached a flat area near the top. The rain hit my hood and the wind gusted around me. I didn't see the figure. My lungs burned from the climb and from panic. I searched for a better shelter and found a shallow, cave-like opening behind some large boulders. I moved inside and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. My fingers were twitching, and I couldn't keep my legs still. I kept scanning the area outside. The sky was darker now, and the wind was louder. I listened for any sign of movement. My eyes darted around, but all I saw was swirling rain and the outline of trees lower on the slope. I thought about heading down right then, but the trail was already slippery, and darkness was approaching. I decided to stay put for a bit, hoping the rain would let up. As I sat there, I felt a brief gust of cold air pass near my shoulder. The hair on my arm stood up. My stomach tightened, and I let out a short gasp. I snapped my head to the right, thinking something touched me, but there was nothing. My body shook with shivers from the cold and from stress. I pressed my back to the cave wall, trying to make myself feel more secure. I was wide awake, hyper alert, every muscle tense. After about an hour, the rain slowed. The wind still blew, but I decided to try the descent. I turned on my flashlight, put on my hood, and began walking down the trail. The fog was thick in places, so I moved carefully. Every few steps I paused to listen. I heard water dripping from branches. I heard the wet sound of my boots on mud and rocks. At one point, I thought I heard faint footsteps behind me, but when I turned, I saw only emptiness. The tension in my chest made my heart race. My throat felt tight, my mouth was dry. I pressed on, refusing to look back again. As I continued, the trail curved around a large rock face. The fog swirled, and I saw that figure one more time. He stood near the edge of the path just a few yards away. I could see a dark outline where a face should be. My flashlight shone on him, but the light didn't reveal a clear image. I froze, hand clenched around the flashlight. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed for me to move, but my feet felt stuck. The figure lifted an arm. I saw something that looked like a hand. It reached toward me, but it didn't touch me. It hovered there, silent. My heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. I took a step back, nearly slipping on the wet ground. Then the figure vanished, dissolving into the fog. There was no sound, no rush of air, nothing. I stood there, heart beating like a drum. My legs shook, and my forehead was drenched in sweat. I forced myself to keep walking down. I avoided that spot where he had just appeared, skirting the edge of the trail. I don't remember much of the next 15 minutes. I only recall reaching a wider path and feeling relief. My jaw was tight and my arms felt weak. When I finally reached the base, I jogged the last stretch to my car. I got in, shut the door, locked it, and leaned against the seat, breathing hard. My clothes were soaked and my fingers were stiff from gripping the flashlight. I checked my shoulder, expecting to feel that cold touch again, but there was nothing. For the next hour, I drove home in silence. My hands were shaky on the steering wheel. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting something to be in the back seat, but it was empty. When I got home, I sat on my couch without turning on the lights. My heart was still racing and my mind wouldn't settle. My body felt worn out. My muscles ached and my thoughts were jumbled. I thought about that first time I felt the hand on my shoulder. It had felt so real. Now I'd seen that figure up close. I still don't know if he's a lost traveler's spirit, an echo of something on that mountain, or if my mind is playing tricks. All I know is that I felt that cold hand and saw that man wrapped in fog. That's all I can say. I don't have a neat explanation. I'm just a guy who likes climbing and stumbled onto something I can't explain. I'm not sure I want to go back anytime soon, but I can't get the memory out of my head. For now, I'm staying away from High Point Peak. That cold hand on my shoulder felt real, and I still get chills when I think about it. I'm just trying to get some sleep and keep my mind calm. But every time I close my eyes, I remember the feeling of that cold touch and that figure fading into the mist. I don't know if I'll ever forget it,